It was around 1:45 a.m. when I heard my phone buzz on the nightstand. I ignored it at first, figuring it was just some spam notification or a random update I didn't need. But then it buzzed again and again. Whoever was on the other end wasn't giving up. Half asleep, I grabbed the phone and squinted at the screen. Jules. Seeing her name there made my heart do that stupid thing it always did. The sharp skip, followed by a tight ache. I hadn't talked to Jules in almost a year. Not since the day she left, vanishing from my life without so much as a goodbye. And now here she was calling in the middle of the night like she'd never left. I hovered my thumb over the screen, debating whether to answer. But before I could make up my mind, my phone buzzed one last time. A text this time, simple and blunt. Come outside. I threw on a hoodie and opened the door to find her standing at the bottom of the stairs, hands stuffed in the pockets of a denim jacket I'd seen 1,000 times before. She looked like Jules always looked, like trouble wrapped in something too familiar to resist. Her hair was a mess, her eyeliner smudged, and yet somehow she still managed to look effortlessly put together in that way she always did. "Hey," she said, her voice soft and just a little bit uncertain. "Jules," I murmured, still trying to convince myself she was really here. "What the hell are you doing?" She gave me that half smile I remembered so well. The one that always seemed to say, "I know I shouldn't be here, but you don't want me to leave either." "Want to go for a drive?" she asked, her eyes glinting under the dim porch light. I should have said no. I knew that much. But with Jules, knowing what you should do and actually doing it were two very different things. "Let me grab my keys," I muttered, and before I knew it, we were climbing into my car, the night wrapping itself around us like a secret. We drove in silence for a while, the soft hum of the engine filling the space between us. Jules rolled down her window, letting the cool night air whip through her hair, and I watched her out of the corner of my eye, wondering what had brought her back after all this time. "So," I said eventually, breaking the quiet. "What's going on, Jules?" She didn't answer right away. She just stared out at the empty road ahead, chewing on her bottom lip the way she always did when she was trying to figure out how much of herself she was willing to give away. "Do you ever feel like you left something unfinished?" she asked softly, still not looking at me. I tightened my grip on the wheel, my chest tightening along with it. "All the time." She nodded, as if that answer was enough for now. We ended up on the highway, the city shrinking behind us in the rearview mirror as we sped toward the outskirts. It felt reckless, like the kind of thing you only do when you know you're running from something, even if you can't name what it is. "I thought about calling you a lot," Jules admitted, her voice almost drowned out by the wind rushing through the cracked window. "Why didn't you?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. She gave a small, humorless laugh. "Because I figured you hated me." I glanced at her, surprised by how small she looked, curled into herself in the passenger seat. "I never hated you, Jules." She smiled then, but it wasn't the kind of smile that meant everything was okay. It was the kind of smile you wear when you're tired of pretending you've got it all figured out. We found ourselves on one of those back roads that feel like they lead nowhere, the kind lined with fields that go on forever, with only the occasional flicker of a farmhouse light breaking the darkness. Jules reached over and turned on the radio, flicking through stations until she found something soft and slow. She leaned back in her seat, her eyes half closed, and for a moment, it felt like we were teenagers again, just two kids who thought the world could wait. "Do you ever wonder," she asked quietly, "what it would have been like if we hadn't fucked everything up?" I let out a slow breath, the question hanging heavy between us. "Yeah," I said. "I wonder all the time." She nodded, like that was the answer she'd been expecting. At some point, we pulled over on the side of the road, the sky above us endless and dotted with stars. Jules climbed out without a word and sat on the hood of the car, her arms wrapped around her knees, the night air thick with things unsaid. I followed her, the metal cool beneath me as I settled beside her. We sat there in the quiet, listening to the hum of crickets and the occasional rustle of the wind through the tall grass. "I was scared," she said suddenly, her voice barely more than a whisper. "That's why I left. I didn't say anything, just waited for her to keep going. I thought if I stayed, I'd ruin it. You know? Us." I closed my eyes, the weight of her words pressing down on me. "You didn't ruin it, Jules." You just left. She looked at me then, her eyes shimmering in the dark. And you stayed. We sat with that for a long time, the stars above us watching in quiet sympathy. There were no apologies, no promises to fix what had been broken. Just two people sitting in the middle of nowhere, trying to find a way back to something they didn't know they'd lost. Do you think, she whispered, we'll ever stop running? I thought about it, the answer sitting heavy in my chest. Maybe, I said, but not tonight. She smiled, a small, bittersweet thing, and leaned her head against my shoulder, the weight of her familiar and oddly comforting. We stayed like that until the first light of dawn began to creep over the horizon, turning the sky a soft shade of blue. We should head back, I murmured, though neither of us made a move to leave. Jules let out a soft sigh, like she was trying to hold on to the moment for just a little longer. Yeah, she whispered, I guess we should. But even as the sun started to rise, painting the world in light, it felt like we'd found a little piece of the night to carry with us. And maybe for now, that was enough. As we drove back, the road stretching long and quiet ahead, Jules reached over and slipped her hand into mine. Just for a moment, just long enough to remind me that some things never really leave you, no matter how far you run. And as the city came back into view, the streets waking slowly beneath the glow of the early morning light, I realized something. Some people show up when you least expect them, not to make things right, but just to remind you that it's okay to have unfinished stories. And maybe, just maybe, you don't always need an ending to know that it mattered. For now, the road was enough, and so was she. It started with a lie I told myself. Just one drink, and then I'll leave. I hadn't planned on going out. In fact, I'd already decided to stay in sweatpants, junk food, a show I wasn't even interested in. But there's a tipping point where the quiet turns unbearable, and the idea of staying home feels heavier than any bad decision waiting outside. When my friend texted, "We're at the bar. Get down here. It's a good night," it didn't take much convincing. I threw on the first thing I could find, a black tank top, tight jeans, the kind of outfit that says I didn't try too hard, but I still look good, and called an Uber. I told myself I'd be in and out, just a drink or two to shake off the monotony. But I knew how it would go. It always goes the same way. The bar was alive, buzzing with voices overlapping each other, the air thick with alcohol, perfume, and possibility. People were crowded together, laughing too loud, clinking glasses in ways that felt a little too celebratory for a Thursday night. It was the kind of scene that makes you feel like you're standing on the edge of something that might matter or at least distract you for a while. I found my friends huddled in the corner, already 3 drinks in, giddy and half a step away from reckless. I waved to them, gave a little "I'll be right back" gesture, and made my way to the bar to grab a drink. That's when I saw him. He was sitting at the end of the bar, leaning on his forearms, swirling a whiskey like it held some kind of answer. He wasn't flashy, wasn't trying to get anyone's attention, and maybe that's what made him impossible to ignore. His dark hair was messy, just enough to suggest he didn't care, and his jacket looked like it had been thrown on without a second thought. He seemed comfortable in a way that made me uncomfortable. He glanced my way, his gaze lingering for just a second too long, as if he'd been waiting for me without even realizing it. And just like that, the night shifted. I could feel it, like a door quietly opening, inviting me inside. I slid onto the bar stool next to him, giving him a small smile. "You always look this serious, or is it just the whiskey?" I asked, tapping the rim of his glass. He smirked, a slow, deliberate thing that felt like a hook in my chest. "Depends. You always start conversations this boldly?" I shrugged, matching his smirk. "Only when I know they'll go somewhere interesting." And just like that, we were off. The conversation was easy, too easy. He was sharp without being smug, funny without trying too hard. There was a rhythm to it, a back and forth that made me feel like I'd known him longer than the few minutes we'd spent together. Every time his hand brushed against mine on the bar, it felt intentional, like he was testing the water before diving in. We talked until the crowd around us began to thin, until the bartender gave us that subtle nod that says last call. I should have said goodnight, returned to my friends, and called it a night before things spiraled. But then he leaned in, just close enough for his breath to skim my ear. "You want to get out of here?" I could have said no. I could have laughed it off, pretended it was nothing, and walked away. But I didn't. I never do. Yeah, I whispered. Let's go. The walk to his apartment was a blur of cold air and stolen glances, our bodies moving closer together with every step. By the time we made it through his front door, we were already kissing, hard, fast, like the night was slipping away and we had to catch it before it disappeared. His apartment was small but warm, with just enough clutter to feel lived in. We stumbled into the bedroom, pulling off clothes and tripping over each other in the kind of frantic rush that makes you feel young, invincible, and gloriously reckless. The sex wasn't perfect, but it didn't need to be. It was messy and wild, full of laughter and breathless curses, the kind of night where bodies collide and nothing else matters. For a little while, I let myself believe that this was enough, that the heat, the closeness, the weight of him pressing me into the mattress could fill the empty spaces I'd been carrying around all week. And for those few hours, it did. But mornings are merciless. I woke up to sunlight leaking through the blinds, slicing across the room like a knife. His arm was draped over me, heavy and warm, and the bed smelled like sleep and skin. For a second, I let myself stay there, my eyes closed, pretending the morning hadn't arrived yet, pretending that maybe, this time, the night would stretch just a little further. But mornings always win. I slid out from under his arm, careful not to wake him, and began gathering my clothes from the floor. There's always something strange about getting dressed in the light of day, like last night's version of yourself doesn't quite fit anymore. My jeans felt tighter, my shirt wrinkled, and every step I took felt heavier than the one before it. I was almost at the door when I heard him stir behind me. Leaving already? He mumbled, his voice thick with sleep. I turned, forcing a small smile. Yeah, I've got stuff. He nodded, propping himself up on one elbow, his hair sticking up in every direction. It was fun, though, he said, and somehow that made it worse. Yeah, I whispered. It was. And just like that, it was over. The walk to the curb felt longer than it should have, the morning air biting in my skin, sharp and unforgiving. I wrapped my coat tighter around me, but it didn't help. The chill I felt wasn't just from the cold. It was something deeper, something that settled into my bones in a way that no amount of warmth could fix. The Uber ride home was quiet, the driver tapping his fingers on the wheel to the beat of some old pop song I barely recognized. I stared out the window, watching the city wake up, and tried to convince myself that this was fine, that this was all I wanted. No strings, no complications, just a night. But the truth sat heavy in my chest, impossible to shake. It wasn't about him. It never is. It was about me, about the way I keep diving headfirst into moments that always slip through my fingers. About the way I keep hoping that maybe, just maybe, one of these nights will finally feel different. But they never do. I got home, kicked off my shoes, and collapsed onto my bed, not even bothering to change. The ceiling stared back at me, blank and indifferent, offering no answers, no solace. Just silence. I wish I could say that this was the last time, that I finally learned how to stop chasing something that doesn't exist. But the truth? I'll probably do it again, because as much as I hate the mornings after, I hate the silence even more. Maybe one day I'll stop, or maybe I won't. Maybe I'll keep going, night after night, hoping that eventually, one of these mornings will feel different. But until then, all I can do is keep moving forward. One kiss, one drink, one morning after the next. The first time I tried flirting at a farmer's market, I accidentally stole a honey jar. To be fair, I didn't mean to steal it. Things just got a little out of hand. It was a crisp Saturday morning, and I had every intention of buying some fresh bread and maybe a jar of fancy jam. That was the plan. But then I saw her at one of the vendor stalls, inspecting a stack of tiny honey jars like she was on the brink of making a life-altering decision. She was beautiful in that cool, effortless way. Big sweater, messy bun, and those round sunglasses that somehow made her look mysterious instead of hungover. I figured, okay, Jake, it's just a conversation. Talk about honey. How hard can it be? So, naturally, I wandered over to her stall and picked up a random jar, hoping to look like a man who knew things about bees. Big honey fan? I asked, doing my best to sound casual. She glanced over and gave me a smile amused smile. Isn't everyone? True, I said, holding up the jar like it was a fine wine. The real question is, do you go for clover or wildflower? Definitely wildflower, she said, her lips curving into a grin. Clover's basic. That was it. I was in. We started chatting about the weird varieties of honey, like lavender and avocado blossom, and I made some dumb joke about believing in quality, which somehow got her to laugh. Things were going better than I could have hoped. At some point, she glanced at the jar in my hand. You gonna buy that one? Oh, I said, realizing I'd been holding it for way too long. Yeah, totally. Big fan of this specific honey. She raised an eyebrow. You don't even know what kind it is, do you? I looked down at the label. Artisan blend? That's a thing, right? She laughed again. This soft, genuine laugh that made me feel like maybe embarrassing myself wasn't such a bad thing after all. Sure, she said. Artisan blend. Very fancy. Feeling a weird surge of confidence, I decided to keep the momentum going. Tell you what, I said, if you help me pick out the perfect honey, I'll buy you a coffee. She tilted her head, pretending to consider it. Tempting, but only if you buy me one of those little croissants too. Deal, I said, grinning like an idiot. Honey and croissants. The perfect Saturday. It was all going so well, too well, really. That's usually when the universe steps in to remind me that I'm, in fact, a disaster. Just as I was about to head to the register to pay for the honey, the conversation took a turn. She looked over her shoulder, distracted for a second, and said, "Oh shoot, there's my friend. I'll meet you by the coffee stall." "Yeah, totally," I said, giving her a little wave. "See you there." And then, without thinking, I turned around and walked off, still holding the honey jar. It didn't hit me until I was halfway to the coffee stand, feeling great about myself and ready to buy those croissants. I glanced down at my hand and saw the jar, and my heart dropped. "Oh no," I whispered to myself. "Oh no, no, no." From a farmer's market, in broad daylight. I panicked. Do I go back? Do I put it down and run? What if the honey vendor already called the cops? I had visions of being chased down by an angry mob of artisanal beekeepers. To make matters worse, just as I was considering my options, I spotted her, waiting by the coffee stall, scanning the crowd for me with a small smile on her face. There was no way I could tell her, "Hey, sorry, I'm a criminal now. Can we do coffee another time?" So I did the only thing I could think of. I shoved the jar of honey into my jacket pocket and walked toward her, praying it wouldn't rattle. "Hey," she said brightly. "There you are. Thought you'd ditch me." "Never," I said, hoping I didn't look as guilty as I felt. We stood in line together, chatting about the weird people at the market, and every time she smiled at me, the weight of that stupid honey jar got heavier in my pocket. When we got to the front of the line, I pulled out my wallet and bought her coffee and a croissant, just like I promised. For a brief, beautiful moment, I thought maybe, just maybe, I'd get away with it. And then she asked the question I'd been dreading. "So, where's the honey?" I froze. "A what?" "The honey," she said, laughing. "Did you put it back?" Now, at this point, I had two choices: tell the truth and look like an idiot, or lie and hope for the best. I accidentally walked off with it. I admitted, feeling my face go hot. It's in my jacket." She stared at me for a beat, her mouth twitching like she was trying not to laugh. "You stole the honey?" "Not on purpose," I said quickly. I panicked. I thought if I went back, they'd think I was a criminal. Her shoulders started shaking, and before I knew it, she was doubled over, laughing so hard she nearly dropped her coffee. "Oh my God," she gasped. "You're unbelievable. I swear I was going to return it," I said, rubbing the back of my neck. "It's just things got out of hand." She finally straightened up, wiping tears from her eyes. "All right, honey thief," she said, still grinning. "I won't turn you in this time." I stared at her, half expecting her to walk away, but instead, she reached out and gave me a playful shove. "Come on," she said. "Let's go back and pay for your loot." Relieved, and more than a little embarrassed, I followed her back to the vendor stall, where I awkwardly handed over the jar and apologized to the very confused beekeeper. To my surprise, she stayed by my side the whole time, laughing softly as I stumbled through my apology. When it was all over and the honey was safely paid for, she turned to me with that same mischievous grin. "So, do I still get my croissant?" "Absolutely," I said, feeling like the luckiest idiot in the world. We sat down on a bench, sipping our coffees and sharing the croissant. And for the first time in a long while, everything felt easy, natural. Like maybe screwing up wasn't the worst thing in the world, as long as you found the right person to laugh about it with. And honestly, that honey tasted amazing. The problem started with my bathroom mirror. I noticed a tiny smudge, just one innocent streak in the corner. No big deal, right? All I had to do was wipe it down, quick and easy. 5 minutes tops. So I grabbed a bottle of glass cleaner and a rag, thinking, might as well handle this now. I'm an adult. I take care of things. That was my first mistake. I sprayed the cleaner on the mirror, gave it a swipe, and immediately made it worse. The rag smeared the smudge into a streaky, cloudy mess that spread across half the mirror like a Jackson Pollock painting in Windex. I tilted my head, squinting at my reflection through the blur, and thought, that's not right. I tried again, wiping harder this time, convinced that more pressure was the solution. It wasn't. The streaks multiplied. Somehow, I'd managed to take one tiny smudge and transform it into a disaster zone. My reflection now looked like it was coming through an old TV with bad reception. No problem, I told myself, lying. You got this. I grabbed a paper towel, figuring it would be better than the rag, and sprayed more glass cleaner. That's when I realized the paper towel was, let's say, low quality. It immediately disintegrated, leaving little white flecks all over the mirror. Now, on top of the streaks, it looked like I'd smeared powdered donuts across the glass. I stared at the mess, starting to sweat. This was supposed to be easy. A quick wipe. How had it spiraled into this? I felt that familiar twinge of panic that happens when you realize a small task has grown teeth and now wants to ruin your life. Determined to fix it, I went into full problem-solving mode. I Googled how to clean streaks off mirrors and found an article that recommended using vinegar and newspaper. Imutara. Vinegar and newspaper. Old school. That'll do it. Except I didn't have vinegar. Or newspaper. What I did have was an old bottle of lemon juice and a roll of paper towels. My sworn enemy at this point. But desperate times, right? I mixed water with the lemon juice, poured it into a spray bottle, and started spritzing the mirror like I was performing some kind of cleaning exorcism. The good news? The lemon juice smelled nice. The bad news? It did absolutely nothing to help. The streaks were still there, taunting me. Worse, now the bathroom smelled like a lemonade stand, and my hands were sticky from the spray bottle leaking. At that point, it wasn't just about the mirror anymore. It was about my dignity. I was going to make this thing shine if it killed me. I grabbed another rag, sprayed one last round of cleaner, and attacked the mirror with the kind of ferocity usually reserved for people scrubbing evidence off a crime scene. For a second, it looked like I'd won. The streaks started to fade, the smudges disappeared, and my reflection finally came into focus. Yes, I whispered, triumphant. You did it. You're a genius. And that's when the spray bottle slipped from my sticky lemon-soaked fingers and crashed to the floor. The cap popped off on impact and glass cleaner shot out in every direction, soaking the sink, the floor, and naturally me. I stood there, drenched and smelling like a combination of ammonia and citrus, wondering how things had gone so catastrophically wrong. I could feel the universe laughing at me. All I wanted was a clean mirror. Was that so much to ask? The cat poked her head into the bathroom, probably curious about what fresh disaster I created this time. She sat down in the doorway, blinked slowly, and then knocked over the spare toilet paper roll with one lazy paw. You're not helping. She stared back with the serene indifference of someone who knew she was untouchable. I mopped up the spilled cleaner with the same useless paper towels that had started this whole mess, thinking, why do I even try? My bathroom now looked like I'd hosted a cleaning-themed rave, and the mirror, well, it was better but not perfect. There were still a few stubborn streaks along the edges, mocking me. But I decided I didn't care anymore. I was done. Sometimes life is about knowing when to walk away. I peeled off my damp shirt, threw it in the laundry basket, and shuffled into the kitchen, defeated but somehow relieved. The mirror was good enough. I poured myself a glass of water, leaned against the counter, and stared at nothing for a minute, letting the chaos of the last 20 minutes settle. As I stood there, I realized something. life is just like that mirror. No matter how hard you try to make everything perfect, there will always be a few streaks and smudges you can't get rid of. And that's okay. It doesn't have to be perfect. It just has to be functional. The cat sauntered into the kitchen, rubbing against my leg as if to say, "You'll live." "Yeah," I said, scratching her head. "I know." I grabbed a snack from the pantry, one of those little bags of pretzels, and settled onto the couch, feeling strangely content. The bathroom mirror could wait. Everything could wait. Tonight, it was just me, my pretzels, and a very judgmental cat. And honestly, that was enough. We met on a rainy Thursday night at a bar I didn't even want to go to. My friend was adamant, dragging me out, saying, "You've been stuck in your head too long. One drink won't kill you." I wasn't in the mood for small talk or crowded spaces, but I went anyway. And that's when I saw him, sitting at the end of the bar with a half smile and a whiskey in hand, like he belonged there. He caught me looking and raised his glass with an easy grin. "Rough night," I shrugged, not ready to spill my entire life story to a stranger. "Long week," I said instead. "Join the club," he replied. And before I knew it, he'd slid onto the stool next to mine, ordered me a drink, and just like that, we were talking. It wasn't a grand connection, not at first. Just two people who happened to sit next to each other on a rainy night, sharing conversation because it was easier than sitting alone. But the more we talked, the lighter I felt, like the weight I'd been carrying all week had loosened, even if just for a little while. We laughed about the awful weather, swapped stories about our worst jobs, and talked about the places we'd travel if life ever slowed down enough to let us. I wasn't planning to give him my number, but when the bar closed and he asked if I want to grab dinner sometime, I found myself saying yes. It started simple, just a few dates, no pressure, no big expectations. We'd meet up for burgers or late-night coffee, text throughout the day, and watch bad movies together on lazy weekends. It was comfortable, easy in a way that makes you think maybe you're onto something good. He wasn't over-the-top romantic, but he showed up when it mattered. He remembered how I took my coffee, laughed at my dumb jokes, and kissed me like it was the easiest thing in the world. And for the first time in a long time, I let myself believe that maybe, just maybe, someone was going to stay. But slowly, things began to change. It wasn't dramatic. No huge argument, no sudden disappearance. Just little things at first. He stopped texting as much. Our plans became tentative, like they were optional instead of something he wanted. "Sorry," he'd say. "Work's crazy. Let's hang out soon." But soon started stretching further and further away until it felt like I was waiting on something that might never come. I told myself it was just a rough patch. Everyone gets busy, right? Relationships can't always stay in that perfect honeymoon phase. But the more space he took, the smaller I felt. I kept trying to meet him halfway, but every time I reached out, he drifted further, like I was chasing a shadow of who he used to be. One night, after he canceled plans again without offering to reschedule, I couldn't hold it in any longer. I texted him, "Hey, I just need to know, are we still on the same page? Because it doesn't feel like we are." He didn't respond for hours. And when he did, his answer was the kind that breaks your heart while pretending not to. "I really care about you," he wrote, "but I think I need some time to figure things out. It's not fair to ask you to wait for me." There it was, the slow, soft goodbye disguised as kindness. I wanted to ask him what changed, why he made me feel like we were building something, only to walk away when things got real. But I knew the answer wouldn't matter. People leave not because you're not enough, but because they weren't ready to stay. And knowing that doesn't make it hurt any less. So I wrote back, "I understand." It was all I could say without begging him to stay, and I refused to beg. And just like that, it was over. The days that followed were strange. On the surface, nothing had changed. My life looked the same. But underneath, everything felt different. Empty in places I didn't know could feel empty. I went through the motions, went to work, saw friends, scrolled mindlessly through social media. But no matter what I did, there was this dull ache that sat quietly in the background, reminding me of everything I thought we could have been. I kept waiting for him to text, to call, to say he'd made a mistake. But the silence stretched on, long and final, until I knew I'd been holding on to something that was already gone. Some nights, I'd find myself scrolling through our old texts, reading his words like a story, I couldn't let go of. I wanted to understand how we went from something so good to nothing. I kept thinking that if I could just pinpoint the moment it all fell apart, maybe I'd stop missing him. But the truth is, some people leave without warning, and closure isn't something they owe you. Slowly, painfully, I started to let go. Not all at once. It never happens that way. But little by little, I stopped reaching for my phone every time it buzzed, stopped looking for him in places I knew he wouldn't be. The ache didn't disappear overnight, but it started to feel smaller. Bearable. Some days are easier than others. There are moments when I feel okay, like I've made peace with what happened, like I'm ready to move forward. But there are still nights when the sadness creeps in, soft and unexpected, catching me off guard. And I think that's okay. Healing isn't linear. It's messy and complicated, 2 steps forward and 1 step back. But I'm getting there, slowly but surely. I still believe in love. I believe that one day, I'll meet someone who stays. Not because it's easy, but because they want to. Someone who chooses me, day after day, not just when it's convenient. And until then, I'll keep showing up for myself. I'll keep building a life I love, not because I'm waiting for someone to share it with, but because I deserve that kind of joy. If love finds me again, I'll be ready. But this time, I'll know that my worth isn't tied to someone's decision to stay. I am enough just as I am. With or without someone else, I am whole. And that's a kind of peace no one can take from me. So I'll keep going. 1 step at a time, 1 breath at a time. And if someone shows up who's willing to walk beside me, that'll be a gift. But if not, I'll still be standing, still hoping, still believing. Because at the end of the day, I've got me. And for now, that's more than enough. We always said it wouldn't happen to us. We were too smart for that. Too careful. But if there's one thing I've learned, it's that nothing really prepares you for the moment everything changes. It started like most things with Danny, in the middle of the night. She texted me at 12:14 a.m. "You awake?" I was. Of course, I was always awake for her. She showed up at my place 20 minutes later, barefoot, wearing an oversized sweatshirt she'd stolen from me months ago. She had this look on her face, somewhere between tired and lost. And the second I opened the door, she let out a sigh, like she'd been holding her breath all day. "Rough night?" I asked, stepping aside to let her in. "You could say that." She gave me a tired smile and collapsed onto my couch, tucking her legs under her like she belonged there. And in a way, she did. Danny had always been the one constant in my life. The person who felt like home, even when everything else was falling apart. We sat in silence for a while, the way only 2 people who really know each other can. She picked at the frayed edges of a pillow, and I waited, knowing she'd tell me what was on her mind when she was ready. She trailed off, her eyes fixed on some distant point in the room. "I'm so tired of people leaving." I wanted to tell her that I'd never leave, that I'd been there all along, waiting for her to notice. But instead I said, "I know." And maybe that was the moment. Maybe that was when everything between us started to shift. She looked up at me, and something passed between us, something unspoken but undeniable. I felt it settle in the space between us, heavy and impossible to ignore. I could have let it go. I should have. But instead, I leaned in, and before I knew it, she was kissing me like it was the only thing keeping her grounded. It wasn't slow. It wasn't careful. It was years of friendship, of unspoken feelings, of all the things we'd never let ourselves want, crashing into us at once. And just like that, the line between us disappeared. We stumbled into my bedroom, a mess of hands and breathless laughter, shedding years of restraint along with our clothes. And for a little while, everything felt right, like we'd finally stopped pretending, finally let ourselves fall. Afterward, she curled up beside me, her head resting on my chest, and I thought maybe, just maybe, we'd found something real. "This doesn't change anything, right?" she whispered, her fingers tracing circles on my skin. I wanted to tell her the truth, that it had already changed everything, that I didn't know how to be just her friend anymore. But instead, I kissed her forehead and whispered, "Right, nothing has to change," but everything did. For the next few weeks, we pretended we were still just us. Still the same best friends we'd always been, with nothing complicated between us. But every time we ended up in bed together, it got harder to keep pretending, harder to ignore the fact that I was falling for her, harder to convince myself that she'd ever feel the same. Danny wasn't one for commitments. She lived in the moment, chasing whatever felt right at the time, never looking too far ahead. And me? I wanted her to stay. I wanted her to choose me, not just at night, but in the daylight too. But that wasn't Danny. It all fell apart one night, as these things always do. We were lying in bed, her hair tangled against my pillow, and before I could stop myself, the words slipped out. I love you. The silence that followed was deafening. She went still beside me, her breath catching in her throat. And in that moment, I knew that I'd just lost her. Danny, I whispered, hoping, praying for anything but what I already knew was coming. She sat up slowly, pulling the blanket around her like a shield. You know I can't. I don't want to hurt you. You already are, I said quietly. Her face crumpled with something like regret, and she reached for me, but I shifted away. I didn't mean for this to happen, she whispered. I know, I said, my voice hollow. But it did. She stayed the night, but it was different, like we both knew it was the last time. And when morning came, she kissed me softly, almost like an apology, and whispered, I'll see you soon. But she didn't. We tried to stay friends, but it was like holding on to something that was already slipping through our hands. Every conversation felt strained, every laugh forced. And slowly, painfully, we drifted apart, not because we wanted to, but because we didn't know how to be anything else. It's been months now, and I still think about her. I still catch myself scrolling through our old texts, rereading the conversations that used to feel so easy. I wonder if she ever misses me, if she ever regrets what happened between us, or if she's already moved on, chasing the next thing that feels right. People always say that sleeping with your best friend is either the best decision you'll ever make or the worst mistake of your life. For me, it was both. For a little while, I had her. I had everything. And then, just like that, it was gone. Would I do it all over again? Honestly, I don't know. Part of me wishes I'd never kissed her, that we'd stayed on the safe side of the line where everything made sense. But another part of me knows I wouldn't change a thing, because some people aren't meant to stay in your life forever. Some people are just passing through, leaving behind memories that hurt in the best ways. And even though it still aches, God, does it ache? I'm grateful, because for a little while, she was mine. And even if I never have that again, at least I know what it feels like to love someone without holding anything back. And maybe, just maybe, that's enough. Or maybe it isn't. But either way, it's all I have. It was one of those situations that felt completely innocent until it wasn't. I didn't wake up that morning thinking I'd ruin a friendship, and I definitely didn't think I'd be the reason everything came crashing down. But some mistakes? You don't see them coming until you're already in the middle of them, drowning with no way out. It all started when my best friend Eric went on a weekend trip with his girlfriend. His mom, Marissa, needed a hand with some things around the house while he was gone. Just little stuff like fixing a shelf and mowing the lawn. I'd known Marissa for years. She was the cool mom, the kind who knew how to joke around with us, but never tried too hard. She was beautiful in a way that sneaks up on you. Dark wavy hair, almond-shaped eyes, and this calm presence that made everything feel easy. I'd never let myself think about her beyond being Eric's mom. I didn't even think I could see her any other way. At least, not until that day. I swung by in the early afternoon, planning to be in and out in under an hour. Marissa met me at the door with a smile that felt different, softer, like we were already sharing a secret, even though nothing had happened. Yet, thanks for coming, she said, brushing a stray curl from her face. Eric said you'd be able to help. I really appreciate it. No problem, I said, trying to keep things casual. I spent the next hour fixing the loose shelf in the hallway and clearing some junk from the garage. When I finished, she insisted I stay for a drink. Come on, she said with that playful smile. It's too hot out there. You've earned it. I should have left. I should have made up an excuse, said I had somewhere to be. But instead, I sat down at the kitchen island while she poured us both a glass of wine. We talked just small stuff at first, but the more we drank, the easier the conversation became. We drifted into deeper topics, Her divorce, how empty the house felt with Eric gone so much, how weird it was to have all this free time and no one to share it with. "It's strange," she said, swirling her wine. "You spend your whole life taking care of someone, and then one day, they don't need you anymore." I nodded, feeling something stir in me. "Yeah," I muttered. "That sounds tough." There was a moment of silence. One of those heavy pauses where the air shifts, and you know something is about to happen. Her hand brushed mine. Just a small, fleeting touch, but it felt like it had cracked open a door we shouldn't have touched. "I always liked you," she said quietly, her eyes holding mine a little too long. It was just a compliment. That's what I told myself. But the way she said it, soft, deliberate, made my heart race. I knew I should have laughed it off, should have made some excuse and left. But instead, I leaned in, and she didn't pull away. The kiss was soft at first, like we were testing the waters, daring each other to stop. But then she tugged me closer, and all the reasons why this was a bad idea disappeared. My hand slid to her waist, pulling her against me, and suddenly we were stumbling toward the living room, lost in something that felt too big to fight. We fell onto the couch, breathless and reckless. Her skin was warm beneath my hands, and for a few stolen minutes, nothing outside that room mattered. When it was over, we lay there, tangled together in silence. The weight of what we'd just done settled over us like a heavy fog. "This can't happen again," she whispered, her fingers still tracing light circles on my arm. "Yeah," I said, though we both knew it was a lie. And it was. Over the next few weeks, we found ways to see each other. Quick visits, late-night texts, stolen moments that felt both thrilling and dangerous. Every time, we swore it would be the last. And every time, it wasn't. The guilt gnawed at me every time I saw Eric. He had no idea what was going on. No clue that the person he trusted most was betraying him in the worst way possible. Every time he called me his brother, every time he thanked me for helping out his mom, it felt like a knife twisting in my chest. And then one night it all came crashing down. Eric came home earlier than expected. I thought we had more time, but suddenly the front door swung open while I was still in the kitchen with Marissa. We were standing too close, her hand resting lightly on my arm, and the look on Eric's face when he saw us. It was like watching someone's world fall apart in real time. "What the fuck?" Eric whispered, his voice low and dangerous. "Eric," Marissa started, but he cut her off with a sharp shake of his head. "No," he said, his voice cracking. "No fucking way." His eyes flicked between us, disbelief turning into fury. "You've been hooking up with my mom?" I opened my mouth to explain, but what could I say? The truth was worse than any lie I could have come up with. "How long?" he demanded, stepping closer. "Eric, listen." "How long?" he shouted, his fists clenched at his sides. Since a few weeks ago," I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. The betrayal in his eyes was worse than any punch could have been. "You were supposed to be my best friend," he whispered, his voice trembling. "How could you do this? With her?" There was nothing I could say. No apology that would make this right. "Get out," Eric growled, his voice shaking with rage. "Eric, please, get the fuck out of my house." I left without another word, the sound of the doors slamming behind me ringing in my ears like a death sentence. Marissa tried to reach out afterward, texts, calls, but I ignored them. Whatever we'd had wasn't worth the wreckage it left behind. Eric blocked me on everything, phone, social media, the works. I tried once to apologize, but it was too late. The damage was done. It's been a couple of years now, but that night still haunts me. Every time I see Eric's name pop up in a mutual friend's post, it feels like a punch to the gut, a reminder of everything I destroyed for a moment of weakness. Some mistakes fade with time. Others stay with you, etched into your memory like scars you can never fully escape. And this one? This one will haunt me for the rest of my life. This story is known as the Night of 1,000 Crickets. It started as a prank, but by the end of the night, we were practically begging for the authorities to show up and save us. Let me explain. It was supposed to be a typical senior prank. You know the kind, something obnoxious enough to annoy the teachers, but not so crazy that it gets anyone arrested. We'd done the classics already. Sticky notes on every locker, plastic wrap on the cafeteria tables, even filled the hallways with balloons one year. But this time, Ben, the king of bad ideas, decided we needed to go bigger. Much bigger. "What if," he said one Friday after school, leaning against the lockers with that look in his eye that always meant trouble, "we fill the school with crickets?" I blinked at him, hoping he was joking. "Crickets?" "Yeah," Ben said, like he'd just come up with a cure for boredom. 1,000 crickets. Maybe more. It'll be hilarious, like a live-action horror movie. It was definitely not going to be hilarious. But because we were dumb high school seniors with nothing better to do, we all agreed. In hindsight, that decision should have landed us all in some kind of juvenile detention. Ben, of course, had a plan. His uncle worked at a pet store, and according to Ben, he could get his hands on a bulk order of crickets, the kind people used to feed their lizards or whatever. "Don't worry," Ben assured us. "They're harmless. Just loud." Understatement of the century. The plan was simple. Sneak into the school the night before a big assembly, release the crickets in the main office and hallways, and let the chaos unfold when everyone showed up the next morning. Foolproof, right? Except like every dumb high school prank, it was doomed from the start. We met up outside the school around midnight. There were 6 of us, me, Ben, Tyler, our unofficial lookout, Sarah, who kept reminding us this was a terrible idea, and 2 other guys whose names I've honestly forgotten because they bailed halfway through. We had a duffel bag filled with plastic containers, each one teeming with crickets. I have to give it to Ben. He really did get 1,000 crickets. Maybe more. The containers were practically vibrating with the sound of chirping, and every time I touched one, I got that spine-tingling feeling like I was holding a live grenade. "All right, let's do this," Ben whispered dramatically, like we were about to rob a bank. Tyler kept watch by the doors while the rest of us sneaked inside, through the side entrance Ben had somehow unlocked. We moved quickly, keeping our heads low, trying not to freak out as the crickets chirped louder and louder in their containers. "This is such a bad idea," Sarah muttered for the 10th time. "We'll be fine," Ben whispered back. "It's just crickets." We started in the main office. Ben popped open one of the containers, and with a grin, dumped a swarm of crickets onto the principal's desk. They immediately scattered, hopping and chirping, disappearing into every nook and cranny. It was both gross and impressive how fast they moved. "This is so bad," I whispered, watching one cricket jump onto the PA system. But Ben was in his element. "Next room," he said, practically giddy. For the next half hour, we moved from room to room, releasing crickets into classrooms, lockers, even the gym. By the time we were done, the school was practically alive with the sound of chirping. It was everywhere. This creepy, relentless background noise that echoed through the empty hallways like something out of a horror movie. We thought it was funny, at first, but then something went horribly wrong. As we were finishing up in the science wing, Ben accidentally tipped over one of the containers. It hit the floor with a loud crack, and before we knew it, crickets were everywhere. Hundreds of them. Thousands. They didn't just scatter, they swarmed. I didn't even know crickets could swarm, but apparently, when they're crammed together in a tiny container, they develop some kind of mob mentality. "Oh shit," Sarah whispered, eyes wide as the crickets started crawling up the walls, hopping onto desks and skittering across the floor in waves. "Get them," Tyler hissed, trying to catch one with his hands, which, spoiler alert, did not work. "Forget it, we need to go," I said, my voice rising in panic as crickets started hopping onto my shoes. But Ben was determined to finish the job. He ran into the janitor's closet, grabbed an industrial-sized broom, and started sweeping at the crickets like he was in some kind of cricket rodeo. It was chaotic, crickets flying through the air, chirping louder than ever, while the rest of us flailed around, trying not to freak out. And then, we heard footsteps. "Someone's coming," Sarah whispered, eyes wide. Sure enough, down the hallway, we saw the unmistakable shape of the night janitor. He was carrying a mop, oblivious to the fact that he was walking straight into a cricket apocalypse. We panicked. There was no way we could explain this. We weren't just releasing a few crickets for a prank. This was an infestation. We'd basically turned the school into a bug horror show. "Run!" Ben shouted, finally abandoning his cricket broom strategy. We bolted. Like actual criminals, we sprinted down the hallway, dodging crickets and slipping on the tiled floor. Sarah grabbed my arm and practically dragged me through the exit as the janitor turned the corner. I glanced back just in time to see his face light up in pure, unfiltered horror. I will never forget the look of confusion, disgust, and panic as he saw the endless sea of crickets chirping in every direction. We barely made it out of the school before the lights came on. As we tumbled into the parking lot, gasping for breath, we could still hear the sound of chirping echoing from the school behind us. Even from outside, the noise was deafening. "We're so dead," Tyler panted, hands on his knees. "No one saw us," Ben insisted, still grinning like the absolute maniac he was. "We'll be fine." We were not fine. The next morning, when we showed up for school, the place was in chaos. I've never seen so many confused and horrified faces in my life. The crickets hadn't just stayed in the rooms we'd released them in. They had spread everywhere. The entire school was infested. Every hallway, every classroom, every locker, crickets. They were crawling out of vents, hopping out of backpacks, and chirping so loudly that the teachers could barely speak over the noise. The school called in exterminators, but the crickets were relentless. For hours, they just kept coming, an endless swarm of tiny, chirping monsters. The principal? Absolutely furious. They had to cancel classes by noon because the noise and the infestation were too much to handle. There were rumors that someone had even spotted crickets in the cafeteria food. And somehow, through it all, we never got caught. No one snitched. The teachers never found out who did it, and Ben, true to form, walked around school like the smug ringleader he was, grinning like the Cheshire Cat while crickets chirped from every corner. The whole thing became a legend. To this day, when people talk about the weirdest things that happened at our school, the Great Cricket Incident is always number one. And Ben? He keeps a single plastic cricket on his keychain as a souvenir, like some kind of demented trophy. "I told you," he always says with a smirk. "Crickets are hilarious." And honestly, as much as I hate to admit it, he wasn't wrong. This happened 2 nights ago. I haven't slept since, and I don't know if I ever will again. I keep thinking if I stay awake, if I keep every door and window locked, maybe it won't happen again. It was a little past midnight when it started. I was lying in bed, trying to fall asleep, when I heard the first noise, a soft, deliberate knock. Top, top, top. It wasn't from the front door. It was coming from the window across the room. The window that faces out into nothing but an alley. I live on the 3rd floor. There's no fire escape, no ledge anyone could stand on. Just a blank drop to the alley below. The knocking came again, soft and patient. Top, top, top. I sat up slowly, my heart pounding. My phone was charging on the nightstand, but the screen was dark. No messages. No missed calls. Just a knocking at the window. I didn't want to look. Every instinct told me not to look. But you know how sometimes curiosity feels stronger than fear? I grabbed my phone and turned on the flashlight. My hand shaking so badly, the beam jittered across the walls. Top, top, top. I inched toward the window, breath shallow, and pulled the curtain back just an inch. And that's when I saw it. A face. Not just any face, my face. It was pressed against the glass, grinning at me with wide, gleaming eyes and a mouth stretched into an impossibly wide smile. The skin looked wrong, like it had been pulled too tight over the bones, as if the thing wearing it had no idea how a human body was supposed to work. Then it raised a hand, my hand, and knocked again. Top, top, top. "Let me in," it whispered, grinning so hard I thought its face might split. Its voice was just like mine, but warped, too flat, too cheerful, like it was trying to sound friendly, but didn't quite understand what friendliness was. I stumbled backward, dropping my phone. The flashlight beam skittered across the floor, casting jittery shadows on the walls. "Let me in," it said again, louder this time. I didn't answer. I couldn't. My legs felt like lead, my heart hammering so hard it hurt. The thing outside pressed its face harder against the glass, fogging it up with shallow, rapid breaths. Its eyes didn't blink. I wanted to run. I wanted to lock myself in the bathroom or call someone, anyone, but I knew somehow that it wouldn't help. It was already here. The knocking started again, faster this time. Top, 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 top. I clamped my hands over my ears, trying to block it out, but the sound grew louder, more insistent, like it was drilling directly into my skull. And then the voice changed. It didn't sound like me anymore. It became deeper, colder, and filled with something ancient, something that didn't belong in this world. "You can't hide from me," it whispered. The window rattled as the thing outside dragged its nails down the glass, the sound like ice cracking under pressure. "I know you," it hissed. "I know what you're afraid of." The curtain fluttered slightly, and in the dim glow from my dropped phone, I saw something else, a shadow, stretching impossibly long across the wall, shifting and writhing as if the thing outside was trying to slither inside. I grabbed the curtain and yanked it shut, heart pounding in my throat. The knocking stopped, just like that, cut off mid-tap, leaving the room silent except for the sound of my ragged breathing. I thought it was over. I thought maybe, just maybe, I'd scared it off. Then my phone buzzed. I stared at it, dread twisting in my gut. The screen lit up, and I saw the message. "I'm inside." I dropped the phone and scrambled backward, slamming into the wall. My eyes darted around the room, heart hammering in my chest. The windows were still shut. The door was locked. But I knew it was here. And then I heard it. Soft footsteps. They started in the hallway, just beyond the bedroom door, and slowly made their way toward me. Step by step, closer and closer, until they stopped just outside the door. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. My hands were trembling so badly I thought they might shake right off my wrists. Then the doorknob turned. It was slow, deliberate, the sound of metal grinding, as if someone on the other side was savoring every second. I stared at the door, heart thudding in my chest, too terrified to move. And then the voice came again, soft, familiar, patient. "Let me in." This time, it wasn't coming from the window. It was coming from inside the room. I don't remember what happened after that. I must have blacked out because the next thing I knew, it was morning. The sunlight was pouring through the windows, and everything looked normal. Except for one thing. There was a handprint on the inside of the window. Not mine. I moved out the next day, left everything behind. I didn't care about breaking the lease or packing my things. I just wanted to get away. But no matter where I go, I keep hearing it. Every night. Just as I'm about to fall asleep. Talp, talp, talp. And I know one night, I'll hear it again. And when I do, I won't be fast enough to keep it out. It was almost 2 a.m. when my phone buzzed with a text. "You awake?" I stared at it for a second, half expecting I'd imagined it. But no, there it was glowing back at me. The sender? Sam. The name hit me like a punch to the chest. Sam, of all people. We hadn't spoken in what? 8 months? Maybe more. Long enough that I'd gotten used to her absence, even if it still stung sometimes. I told myself not to answer. Just let it sit. But my thumb hovered over the keyboard anyway, as if my body hadn't caught up to the part of my brain that knew better. "Yeah, what's up?" Her reply came almost instantly. "Want to meet up?" I found myself driving 20 minutes later, my headlights cutting through the quiet dark as the city slipped away behind me. She didn't say where she wanted to meet, just said, "By the old pier," and left it at that. The pier had been our spot once, back when things between us were good, back when we thought long nights and reckless promises were enough to keep the world from changing. Now, as I pulled into the lot and killed the engine, the place felt different, smaller somehow. Like time had shrunk it down while we weren't paying attention. Sam was waiting at the edge of the pier, standing with her back to me, arms crossed tight against the cold. The wind off the water ruffled her dark hair, and for a second, I thought about just sitting there and watching her, the way I used to. But instead, I opened the door, stepped into the cool night air, and walked toward her. She didn't turn around when she heard me approach, just said softly, "I didn't think you'd come." "Yeah, well," I muttered, "I'm predictable like that." That earned me a small laugh, quiet but real. And just like that, I was standing beside her again, staring out at the water the way we used to. For a while, neither of us said anything. The pier creaked beneath us, the wind whistling through the gaps in the planks. The waves lapped gently against the posts, steady and endless, like they had all the time in the world. "Why tonight, Sam?" I asked, finally, my voice low. She let out a breath, her shoulders rising and falling like she was trying to shake something off. "I don't know," she whispered. One of those nights. I knew what she meant. Some nights sneak up on you, tugging at old memories like loose threads, unraveling everything you thought you'd tucked neatly away. I miss this place, she added almost to herself. Yeah, I said. Me too. We stayed like that for a while, just two people standing at the edge of the world, not sure if they were looking back or trying to move forward. Do you ever think, Sam said after a while, about how different things could have been? If we just, I don't know, tried harder? Her words hit me harder than I wanted to admit. Yeah, I said softly. All the time. She turned to face me then, her eyes searching mine, as if she was looking for something she wasn't sure she'd find. I thought about calling you so many times, she whispered, but I didn't think you'd want to hear from me. I gave her a small, sad smile. Funny, I thought the same thing. The wind picked up, tugging at her jacket, and she shivered slightly. Without thinking, I shrugged off my hoodie and draped it over her shoulders. She smiled, really smiled this time, the kind that made my chest ache in the best way. You always did take care of me, she murmured. Old habits, I said, trying to keep my voice light. She hugged the hoodie tighter around herself and leaned her elbows on the railing, her gaze drifting back to the water. I hate how easy this feels, she whispered, like no time passed at all. I nodded. Yeah, me too. For a moment, I thought about all the nights we spent out here, sitting on the edge of the pier, legs dangling over the side, dreaming about the future like it was something we could touch. Back then, we believed in forever. Or at least we pretended to. But forever had a way of slipping through our fingers. And now here we were, standing in the aftermath, trying to figure out what was left. Do you think, Sam asked quietly, there's still something here? Or is it just ghosts? I stared out at the water, watching the moonlight ripple across the surface. Maybe both. She smiled again, a small, bittersweet thing. Yeah, that sounds about right. At some point, she pulled herself up to sit on the railing, just like she used to, her legs swinging lazily beneath her. I followed, settling beside her, the night stretching wide and quiet around us. You remember the first time we came here? She asked. I laughed softly. How could I forget? You dared me to jump in, and I almost broke my neck on that stupid rock. She grinned, nudging me with her shoulder. You were such a coward, and you were reckless. I shot back. Still am, she said, but there was a softness in her voice now, like maybe that wasn't something she was proud of anymore. The night wore on, the conversation drifting between us like waves, sometimes crashing, sometimes calm. We talked about everything and nothing, revisiting old memories like worn-out postcards we couldn't bring ourselves to throw away. I wish we hadn't screwed it up, she whispered at one point, her voice barely audible over the wind. Yeah, I said quietly. Me too. But neither of us offered any solutions, because some things are too broken to fix. And maybe that was okay. When the first hints of dawn began to creep over the horizon, Sam let out a soft sigh, as if she'd been holding her breath all night. I should probably go, she murmured, though she didn't move. Yeah, I whispered. Me too. But neither of us made a move to leave. Not yet. She turned to me one last time, her expression soft but steady. I'm really glad I saw you tonight. Me too, I said, and for once it didn't feel like a lie. She slipped off the railing, landing lightly on the wooden planks, and gave me a small, lingering smile, the kind that carried both an ending and a beginning. Take care of yourself, okay, she said. You too, Sam. And just like that, she was gone, her figure disappearing down the pier, the sound of her footsteps fading into the quiet morning. I stayed there a little longer, watching the sky turn from black to deep blue, the world slowly waking up beneath me. And as the first light of day washed over the water, I realized something. Some people come back not to stay, but just to remind you that the things you shared still matter, even if they didn't last. And maybe that was enough. For now, the pier was quiet, and so was I, and that was enough. It started with me thinking I could put together a bookshelf by myself. IKEA, of course. Because where else do you go when you want furniture that promises simplicity but delivers existential crises? I've been putting off assembling it for a week, the box just sitting in the corner of my living room like a passive-aggressive reminder of my lack of motivation. But today was the day. I was ready. I put on some upbeat music, rolled up my sleeves, and told myself, "You are an adult. You can build a shelf." The box was deceptively heavy, and I nearly broke my foot just getting the thing open. But there it was, a tangle of flat wooden panels, plastic corner bits, and what looked like 6,000 screws. It came with instructions, of course, but they were the kind of instructions IKEA specializes in: vague, cryptic diagrams of faceless little people who seem to be assembling the shelf using magic and good vibes. No words, just arrows, and smug little stick figures pointing at bolts. I took a deep breath, dumped all the screws onto the floor, and decided to wing it. How hard could it be? It's just a rectangle. I grabbed the Allen wrench they generously provided, because, of course, everything must be assembled with an Allen wrench, and got to work. Within 5 minutes, I'd already installed 2 pieces backward. One side panel was mysteriously taller than the other, even though both were marked with the same letter, and I managed to jam a wooden peg into a hole where no peg was supposed to go. It was stuck there forever now, a permanent part of the shelf. "Okay," I whispered to no one. "This is fine. It's all fine." I unscrewed everything and started again. This time, I laid out the pieces in order, just like the instructions suggested, because apparently I have trust issues with step-by-step diagrams. I got the sides connected properly and began screwing the base into place. Things were finally looking good. That's when I noticed the extra hole, right in the middle of the shelf. No bolt, peg, or doodad seemed to fit in it. I stared at it for a good minute, trying to make sense of it. Was it supposed to be there? Did I miss a step? Had I accidentally summoned a black hole into my living room? I flipped through the instructions again, but the stick figure people offered no guidance. Just blank, happy stares. "Cool," I muttered. "Just great." I decided to ignore the hole. Sometimes in life, you just have to accept that things won't make sense. I kept building. Slowly but surely, the shelf started to take shape. Sure, it was wobbling a bit, and one of the screws had stripped halfway in, but it was happening. By the time I got to the final step, sliding the back panel into place, I was feeling pretty proud of myself. I might not be Bob the Builder, but I'd gotten this far without completely losing my mind. I lined up the panel, slid it into the grooves, and it didn't fit. The panel stopped halfway down, stuck at a weird angle, as if to say, "Nice try, loser." I pushed harder. Nothing. I tried wiggling it, as if maybe the panel just needed some encouragement. Still no luck. This is the part where a smarter person would have taken everything apart and tried again. But not me. No, I was far too stubborn for that. I decided to brute force it, because what's the worst that could happen? I gave the panel one final shove, and the whole shelf tipped over. I managed to catch it just before it crashed to the floor, but not before scattering half the screws across the room like confetti. I sat there, clutching the wobbly shelf, covered in sweat, wondering how my life had come to this. "Why?" I whispered to the shelf. It didn't answer. That's when the cat wandered in, looking entirely unimpressed with my efforts. She stepped on a loose screw, batted it across the floor, and immediately decided it was her new favorite toy. She pounced on it, chased it under the couch, and disappeared, leaving me alone with the wreckage of my poorly assembled shelf. I sat there on the floor, surrounded by loose bolts, cracked wooden panels, and my rapidly unraveling sanity. For a brief, shining moment, I considered throwing the entire thing out the window, just letting it go. Maybe shelves were overrated. Maybe I didn't need furniture at all. But no, I was too far in now. I was going to finish this shelf if it killed me. I wrestled with the back panel for another 20 minutes before I finally got it into place. It was a little crooked, and the whole thing wobbled like it was built out of wet spaghetti, but it was technically standing. It had 4 sides and a back. That counted as a shelf. I sat back, panting, and admired my work. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't even good, but it was standing, and that was enough. The cat emerged from under the couch, carrying the lost screw in her mouth like a trophy. She dropped it at my feet, then stared at me with the smug satisfaction of someone who knew they contributed absolutely nothing. "Thanks," I muttered. I grabbed the screw and, for no reason other than spite, stuck it into one of the extra holes I couldn't figure out earlier. It didn't fit, of course, but I didn't care. At this point, the shelf and I were locked in a silent war, and I needed to win something, anything. Finally, I stood up, dusted myself off, and placed the shelf against the wall. It wobbled dangerously, but I pretended not to notice. I tossed a couple of books onto it for good measure. The whole thing creaked under the weight like it might collapse at any moment, but it didn't. And in that moment, I felt something close to pride. The shelf might have been held together by stubbornness and poorly aligned screws, but it was my shelf, a monument to mediocrity, a testament to trying, failing, and trying again, even if the end result was still kind of a disaster. I flopped onto the couch, exhausted, and stared at the wobbly shelf with something close to affection. It wasn't perfect, but neither was I, and that I decided was okay. The cat jumped onto my lap, curled into a ball, and purred like she'd been supervising me the whole time. I scratched behind her ears and let out a long, contented sigh. The shelf was standing. The cat was happy. I was still alive, and really, that was all I could ask for. It started with a promise I knew I wouldn't keep. I'll stay for one drink. That's what I told myself as I tugged on a pair of jeans that hugged my hips just right and a top that showed enough skin to feel dangerous. I even said it out loud while I put on mascara, as if hearing the words would make them true. But deep down, I knew better. Nights like these don't end with one drink. They end with your clothes scattered across a stranger's apartment and a long walk home the next morning, hoping the regret won't hit until after the Uber ride. The bar was loud, buzzing with that perfect blend of too much noise and too much alcohol. People were pressed together, spilling into booths, draping themselves over each other in that carefree way you only get when the night feels endless. My friends were already at a high-top table, waving at me with the kind of excitement that only comes after 3 rounds of tequila shots. I gave them a quick wave, but veered toward the bar first. I needed a drink. Something strong enough to shut off the part of my brain that kept whispering, "You should have stayed home." And that's when I saw him. He was standing a few feet away, elbows on the bar, waiting for his drink. He had that effortless look, messy hair, a worn leather jacket, and the kind of lazy posture that says, "I know exactly who I am, and I don't care if you do too." He wasn't scanning the room or trying to get anyone's attention, but somehow he had mine. He caught me looking. Instead of glancing away, he tilted his head slightly, like he was curious about me. And then, just a flicker of a grin, so subtle it was almost a dare. I bit my lip, already feeling the pull. I knew I should have stayed with my friends, kept things simple, and stuck to my one drink promise. But that little grin hooked me, and before I knew it, I was standing next to him. "You always look this broody at bars? Or am I just lucky tonight?" I asked, resting my elbow on the counter. He gave me a small laugh, low and easy, like it was meant just for me. "Guess tonight's your lucky night." And just like that, we were off. The conversation flowed as smoothly as the drinks. Little jokes, shared smirks, the kind of light banter that makes you feel like you've stumbled into something rare. His voice was low, and every time he leaned closer to be heard over the music, it sent a shiver down my spine. I kept telling myself I'd walk away soon, return to my friends, call it a night. But with every word, every glance, the space between us got smaller, and I knew I wasn't going anywhere. "Want to get out of here?" he asked eventually, his gaze steady and unreadable. It wasn't pushy, just a simple question, like he already knew the answer. I nodded. "Yeah, let's go." We didn't say goodbye to anyone. We slipped out into the night, the cool air biting at my skin and making me feel even more alive. His hand brushed against mine, and then he laced our fingers together like it was the most natural thing in the world. That tiny gesture sent a wave of warmth through me, making my heart race in a way that felt dangerous. The cab ride to his place was a blur of streetlights streaking past the windows, our hands still intertwined. I didn't think about what would happen next. I didn't want to. I just wanted to stay in the moment, where everything felt charged with possibility. His apartment was small but warm, cluttered with books and half-unpacked boxes, as if he'd never quite settled in. I liked that it felt like him somehow. The second the doors shut, we were on each other, kissing hard, pulling at clothes, laughing between breaths. It was messy and rushed and perfect, like we were both afraid the night might disappear if we didn't hold on tight enough. The sex was good, Not flawless, not movie scene perfect, but raw and real and exactly what I needed. It felt like a release, like shedding every layer of exhaustion I'd been carrying for weeks. For a little while, nothing existed outside of that room. Just us, tangled in sheets, skin against skin, chasing something we couldn't quite name. And for those few hours, it was enough. But mornings have a way of shattering whatever magic the night creates. I woke up to the pale light of dawn creeping through the blinds, casting long shadows across his room. His arm was draped over me, his breathing soft and steady against my back. For a second, I stayed still, pretending I could stop time, that maybe this morning would feel different. But it didn't. It never does. I slid out from under his arm carefully, gathering my clothes from the floor in silence. There's something almost humiliating about getting dressed in a stranger's apartment. The way last night's outfit feels like a costume you don't want to wear anymore. My jeans felt too tight, my top wrinkled beyond saving, and every movement felt like a reminder that the night was already over. I was halfway to the door when I heard him stir. "Leaving already?" he murmured, his voice thick with sleep. I turned, forcing a small smile. "Yeah, got an early morning." It was a lie, but an easy one. He nodded, rubbing a hand through his messy hair. "Well, it was fun." "Yeah," I whispered. "It was..." And just like that, it was over. The walk to the curb was colder than it should have been, the morning air biting through my coat like it had been waiting to punish me. I wrapped my arms around myself, trying to hold in whatever warmth was left from the night before, but it was already slipping away. The Uber ride home was silent, the driver humming softly to himself while I stared out the window, watching the city wake up. I told myself it was fine, that this was what I wanted, just a night, no strings, no complications. But the truth sat heavy in my chest, impossible to ignore. It wasn't about him. It never is. It was about me. About the way I keep diving into these moments, hoping they'll fill the empty spaces inside me, only to find they never do. I got home, kicked off my shoes, and collapsed onto my bed, still wearing last night's clothes. The ceiling above me stared back, blank and indifferent, offering no answers. Just silence. I wish I could say that night was the last time, that I finally learned how to stop chasing something that always slips through my fingers. But the truth? I'll probably do it again, because as much as I hate the mornings after, I hate the silence even more. Maybe someday I'll figure out how to stop, or maybe I won't. Maybe I'll keep going one night at a time, hoping that eventually one of these mornings will feel different. But until then, all I can do is keep moving forward. One kiss, one drink, one morning after the next. The first time I tried flirting at a dog park, I accidentally played fetch with myself. It all started because my sister was out of town and begged me to watch her golden retriever Max for the weekend. I'm not a dog person. I mean, I like them, but I've never been good with them. Still, how hard could it be? You take the dog to the park, let him run around, throw a ball a few times, and boom, man's best friend, mission accomplished. So, Saturday morning, I grabbed Max a tennis ball and my coffee, and we headed to the dog park. I figured I'd sit quietly on a bench, let Max do his thing, and wait for him to get tired, so I could go home and spend the rest of the day binge-watching Netflix. That's when I saw her. She was standing by the water fountain, chatting with another dog owner. She had this easy, sunlit kind of beauty, messy hair under a baseball cap, an oversized hoodie, and the kind of smile that makes you forget what day it is. Her dog, a sleek, black border collie, was lying at her feet, staring up at her like she personally hung the moon. Meanwhile, Max, being the overenthusiastic golden retriever that he is, decided now was the perfect time to sprint directly toward her. "Max, wait." I called, but it was too late. He barreled toward her like a furry freight train, knocking the tennis ball right out of my hand as he went. The ball bounced, rolled, and landed right by her feet. She bent down, picked it up, and smiled at me. That kind of smile. The one that says, "This is cute, but also, what's your deal?" "Hey," she said, holding up the ball. "Yours?" Technically his," I said, jogging over with Max wagging his tail like he'd just discovered joy for the first time. "But yeah, sorry about that." "No worries," she said, tossing the ball casually in the air. "He's got good taste. My dog's obsessed with this brand." I blinked, caught off guard. Wait, tennis balls have brands? Of course they do, she said, grinning. You gotta give dogs the premium stuff. This was my moment, just a normal conversation about tennis balls and dogs. I could do this. So, does your dog like to share? I asked, gesturing toward Max, who was already trying to wrestle the ball out of her dog's mouth. She laughed, and it was the kind of laugh that makes you feel like you've already won. Depends, she said. What's Max's stance on tug-of-war? Oh, he's a total pacifist, I said, watching as Max immediately tried to yank the ball away with all the force of a professional weightlifter. She raised an eyebrow, amused. Yeah, I can see that. Her dog, who she introduced as Luna, wasn't having it. Luna clamped down on the ball, tugged once, and sent Max rolling backward like a furry tumbleweed. Max, buddy, I muttered, shaking my head. You're embarrassing both of us. She laughed again, and this time I felt like maybe, just maybe, this wasn't going to be a total disaster. And then came the moment that changed everything. As we stood there, chatting about dogs, life, and the weird things pets do, I figured, hey, I'll impress her by showing off my amazing ball-throwing skills. Spoiler, bad idea. I grabbed the tennis ball, took a deep breath, and launched it across the park with what I hoped was an impressive flick of the wrist. Except, the ball didn't fly across the park. It hit a tree branch, ricocheted back at us, and, because apparently the universe hates me, smacked me square in the chest. I stumbled backward, clutching my coffee in one hand and the rogue tennis ball in the other, trying to look like this was all part of my plan. Whoa, she said, covering her mouth to hide her laughter. You okay? Totally, I muttered, pretending I wasn't dying inside. Just practicing my curveball. She burst out laughing. Full, unstoppable laughter that made her dog perk up and wag its tail. And that's when Max, thrilled by all the commotion, decided it was his turn to shine. He grabbed the ball from my hand, sprinted 3 feet away, and dropped it right back at my feet. Good job, buddy, I groaned. I'm so glad we've established that I'm the one playing fetch. The girl, Luna's owner, was laughing so hard she had to lean on the water fountain for support. That, she gasped between giggles, was the best thing I've seen all week. At least someone's having a good time, I muttered, trying not to grin. Come on, she said, nudging me with her elbow. You gotta admit, that was impressive. Oh yeah, I said. If by impressive, you mean deeply humiliating. She smiled, this warm, mischievous smile that made me forget about my tragic ball-throwing skills. I think Max deserves a treat for his efforts, she said. And you, maybe a consolation prize? I raised an eyebrow, still holding the rogue tennis ball. What kind of prize are we talking about? She tilted her head, her grin widening. How about coffee? You know, as a reward for surviving this whole ordeal. My heart did a little somersault. I think I'd like that. We exchanged numbers, and just like that, the awkwardness of the tennis ball incident melted away. Max and Luna ran off together, chasing squirrels and probably plotting their next chaos-filled adventure, while we stood there, making plans for coffee and laughing at the absurdity of it all. As she walked away, I couldn't help but grin, partly because of the accidental disaster, but mostly because somehow, against all odds, I'd managed to turn it into something good. And as Max trotted back over, looking smug with the ball in his mouth, I ruffled his fur. Good boy, I whispered. You really pulled through for me, buddy. And honestly, playing fetch with myself was totally worth it. We met at a late-night diner, the kind of place with sticky tables and waitresses who refill your coffee before you ask. I was there alone, trying to wind down after a long day, when he slid into the booth across from me like we'd planned it. Mind if I sit here? He asked, smiling like he knew I'd say yes. I should have been annoyed. Who invites themselves to a stranger's table? But instead, I found myself laughing. I guess not, I said. And just like that, we started talking. He had this easy way about him, like life didn't scare him the way it scared the rest of us. He told me about his favorite road trips, the time he almost got stranded in the desert, and the ridiculous collection of band t-shirts he swore he didn't mean to accumulate. By the time we finished our coffee, it felt like we'd known each other for years. He asked for my number as casually as someone asking for the time, and before I could overthink it, I gave it to him. He texted me the next day, still thinking about that conversation. Want to continue it over dinner? I said yes. The next few months were everything I didn't know I needed. He was thoughtful in the smallest ways, picking up my favorite snacks without asking, sending me songs he thought I'd like, texting me at random times just to say hi. It wasn't over the top or dramatic, but it was consistent. He made me feel like I mattered, like I didn't have to fight to be seen. And for once, I let myself relax into it. We weren't perfect, no one is, but it felt good, safe. Like maybe this was the kind of love people talk about, but I'd never quite believed in before. I stopped waiting for something to go wrong. I let myself hope, and then little by little he started to slip away. It was gradual at first. A missed text here, a last-minute cancellation there. "Sorry, work's been crazy," he'd say, and I'd tell myself it was fine. Everyone gets busy. But the busy days turned into busy weeks, and soon I was the only one keeping us together. I'd send messages that got half-hearted replies, try to make plans that never happened. And every time he pulled away, I held on a little tighter, hoping I could bring him back. But love doesn't work that way. You can't hold on to someone who's already leaving. The night it all came crashing down, we were supposed to meet for dinner. Nothing fancy, just takeout at my place. I'd spent the whole day looking forward to it, hoping maybe tonight would feel like the beginning again. But an hour before he was supposed to arrive, he texted, "Hey, I think I need some space. I'll call you soon, okay?" I stared at my phone, reading the words over and over, hoping they'd rearrange themselves into something less final. But they didn't. I knew what he really meant. I'm leaving. I just don't know how to say it yet. I wanted to respond with something sharp, something that would make him feel even a fraction of the hurt I was carrying. But instead, I just typed, "Okay," because what else could I say? He never called. In the days that followed, I tried to convince myself I was fine. I went through the motions, work, errands, seeing friends, but everything felt muted, like I was watching my life from the outside. I kept waiting for the sadness to hit me all at once, but it never did. It came in small waves instead. A song on the radio that reminded me of him, the empty space in my bed where he used to be, the stupid urge to send him a meme I knew would make him laugh. I told myself not to miss him, but grief doesn't listen to logic. Some nights, I'd catch myself scrolling through our old texts, reading the conversations from when everything felt easy. I wanted to go back to that version of us, even though I knew it was gone. I wanted to understand how someone could make you feel so important, only to leave like you never mattered at all. But the truth is, some people leave not because you weren't enough, but because they never knew how to stay. And that's the hardest part to accept, knowing that it wasn't about me, but still feeling the ache of being left behind. Slowly, painfully, I started to let go. Not all at once, healing never works that way. But little by little, I stopped waiting for his name to pop up on my screen. I muted his accounts, deleted his photos, and told myself that it was time to move forward. Some days it felt like progress. Other days it felt like starting over. But even on the hard days, I kept going. Because what other choice do we have? I still think about him sometimes. Not in a longing way, but in that quiet, familiar ache that sneaks up on you when you least expect it. I wonder if he ever thinks about me, if he regrets the way things ended, or if I was just a passing phase he barely remembers. I'll never know, and maybe that's okay. These days, I'm learning to be kinder to myself. I'm learning that I deserve more than half efforts and empty promises. I deserve someone who stays, not because it's easy, but because they choose to. And until I find that, I'll keep showing up for myself. I still believe in love, not the kind that sweeps you off your feet, but the kind that shows up every day, even when it's hard. The kind that doesn't flinch when things get messy. I believe that one day, I'll meet someone who stays. Not because they have to, but because they want to. But until that day comes, I'll be okay. I'll keep building a life I love, not because I'm waiting for someone else to join me, but because I deserve that kind of joy. And if love finds me again, I'll be ready. But this time, I'll know that no matter what happens, I'll be enough. Because I've learned that my worth isn't tied to someone else's ability to stay. I am enough, just as I am. With or without someone else, I am whole. And that is a kind of peace I never thought I'd find. So I'll keep going, one step at a time, one breath at a time. And if someone shows up who's willing to walk beside me, that'll be a gift. But if not, I'll still be here, standing tall, knowing that I have myself. And for now, that's more than enough. It all started with a stupid idea. The best stories always do. See, every year before homecoming, the school would host a big parade through town. Every grade had to make a float, and all the clubs and sports teams participated too. The football team rode on a giant truck bed decorated with papier-mâché trophies. The drama kids put on weird costumes no one understood, and the band kids marched behind, out of breath, trying to keep up. The floats were a big deal. Each class spent weeks building theirs in secret, trying to outdo each other. But this year, the seniors were aiming for something truly ridiculous, a pirate ship float. Full-on sails, a fake mast, a treasure chest, even a cannon that shot confetti. It was obnoxiously over the top, which was exactly why our group of friends, me, Nick, Lexi, and of course Ethan, decided that it needed to be stolen. Now, let me clarify. This wasn't our senior class's float. We were juniors. The seniors already hated us just for existing, but we figured if we could steal their float the night before the parade and swap it with something completely ridiculous, we'd be legends. How do we even steal a float? Lexi asked as Ethan pitched the idea to us during lunch. We drive it, Ethan said like this was the most obvious thing in the world. That's not a plan, I pointed out. Ethan shrugged. Details. The thing about Ethan was that he didn't believe in details. He was the kind of guy who thought winging it was a legitimate life strategy. And somehow, things always kind of worked out for him, which only encouraged his bad decisions. The plan, if you could call it that, was to sneak into the football field parking lot the night before the parade, steal the seniors' pirate ship float, and replace it with something. We weren't sure what. Maybe a shopping cart, maybe a couch from Goodwill. We figured we'd improvise. That was mistake number one. Mistake number two was not considering how big the float actually was. The pirate ship float was built on a 20-foot-long flatbed trailer, complete with cardboard sails, plastic skulls, and fake cannon barrels sticking out of the sides. When we snuck into the parking lot that night, dressed in all black like we were pulling off a heist, it hit us just how insane this plan really was. Holy shit, Nick whispered. That thing's massive. We're gonna need like a truck, I muttered. Ethan just grinned. Lucky for you guys, I borrowed my cousin's truck. Borrowed, in this case, meant Ethan took the keys without asking. But we didn't have time to argue. The parade was the next morning, and if we wanted to pull this off, we had to act fast. Nick climbed into the truck, and the rest of us started hooking the float to the hitch. It took way longer than it should have. None of us knew what we were doing, and Lexi almost broke her ankle tripping over a loose rope. But eventually, we got it attached, and that's when things got complicated. See, we'd assumed the float would be light. It was just cardboard and wood, right? Wrong. The damn thing was heavy. As soon as Nick hit the gas, the entire truck groaned like it was trying to drag a whale. This thing weighs a ton. Nick shouted over the engine. Just go. Ethan yelled. The truck lurched forward, dragging the pirate ship out of the lot with a horrible screech. The float wobbled wildly, cardboard cannons flapping in the wind. For a few glorious seconds, it felt like we were actually going to pull it off. And then, the wheel fell off. The right rear wheel of the flatbed trailer popped off like a bottle cap, and the entire float tilted sideways. Oh my God! Lexi screamed. Keep driving. Ethan yelled. What do you mean, keep driving? Nick shouted, slamming on the brakes. The float skidded to a halt in the middle of the road, leaning awkwardly to one side, the mast dangling by a thread. We were officially screwed. For a few seconds, we all just stood there in stunned silence, staring at the broken float. The pirate ship lay on its side like a sad, defeated wreck. Well, I said finally. That's the dumbest thing we've ever done. And then things got worse. We heard sirens in the distance. Cops! Lexi hissed, grabbing Ethan's arm. Relax, Ethan said, waving her off. They're probably not for us. They were definitely for us. A patrol car rounded the corner, its headlights flashing across the wrecked float. The officer pulled over, rolled down his window, and just stared. There was a long, awkward pause. What the hell am I looking at? The cop finally asked. Ethan, bless his soul, didn't even flinch. Parade, rehearsal, he said with a straight face. The cop blinked. In the middle of the night? Yeah, Ethan said confidently. We take Spirit Week very seriously. I thought for sure we were going to jail. But instead, the cop just shook his head, muttered, "Kids these days," and drove off, leaving us standing there with a half-destroyed pirate ship and no idea what to do next. At that point, all we could do was commit. We dragged the float, on 3 wheels, into the parking lot behind the gym and left it there like a defeated corpse. Then, in a fit of desperation, we duct-taped a shopping cart to the flatbed as a replacement float. It was the dumbest thing I've ever seen. A lone shopping cart, duct-taped to the remnants of a pirate ship trailer. But somehow it was perfect. The next morning, when the seniors showed up for the parade, the look on their faces was priceless. Half of them were furious, and the other half couldn't stop laughing. "Where the hell is our float?" one of the football players demanded. Ethan just shrugged. "You do know, man. Pirates, right? Sometimes they sink." And the best part? They actually had to use the shopping cart float in the parade because there wasn't enough time to fix the pirate ship. So while every other class rolled down Main Street in beautifully decorated floats, the seniors rode in the back of a truck with a shopping cart strapped to a broken trailer. It was the dumbest, most chaotic parade our town had ever seen. And to this day, it's the only thing anyone remembers about that year. Ethan? He got grounded for a month, but he said it was worth it. And every time someone brings up homecoming, we all smile and say the same thing. "Remember the pirate ship?" And Ethan, without fail, grins and says, "Yeah, it sank." It always starts with the same lie, just one drink. In and out. No chaos tonight. I wasn't even in the mood. I'd spent the whole day telling myself I'd stay in, wrap myself in a blanket, and ignore the rest of the world. But by 9 p.m., my phone lit up with a message I knew better than to open. "We're downtown. You better not ghost us again." It took me all of 5 minutes to cave. I didn't want to be home alone, scrolling through the same old apps, feeling restless and tired at the same time. Nights like these always come with a price, but at least they make you feel something. So I grabbed a black sweater that dipped just low enough to be interesting, slid into a pair of jeans that hugged all the right places, and told myself, "One drink and you're out." The bar was packed. The hum of conversation, the clink of glasses, the low thrum of bass vibrating through the walls. Everything felt too loud, too alive, but in the kind of way that draws you in. Bodies pressed close, people spilling over booths, laughter breaking out like small fires across the room. And then I saw him. He was leaning against the wall, one hand in his pocket, the other holding a drink like it wasn't his first of the night. He wasn't flashy, wasn't even trying to be noticed. Just standing there, comfortably detached like the chaos around him didn't touch him. That's what made him dangerous. Our eyes met, and for a second, the noise of the room disappeared. He didn't smile, just gave me a long, slow glance that felt like a question and an answer all at once. I knew exactly where this night was headed, and I could have walked away. I should have, but I didn't. I never do. I crossed the room like I was already committed, sliding into the space beside him at the bar. "Is this where all the interesting people hang out? Or did I get lucky?" I asked, flashing a small grin. He turned his head slowly, like he had all the time in the world, and gave me that kind of smile that makes your stomach drop. "Depends. How lucky do you feel?" And just like that, the night belonged to us. The conversation started easy, playful, just enough teasing to keep things light. But there was an edge to it, the kind of tension that lingers between two people who both know how this game ends. Every time his hand brushed mine, a jolt shot through me, and I leaned into it just to see how far we could take it. We ordered another round, and the more we drank, the less space there was between us. His knee pressed against mine under the bar, and when he leaned in to say something that didn't even matter, all I could think about was how close his lips were to my ear. "Want to get out of here?" he asked, low and deliberate, like he already knew the answer. I smiled. "Lead the way." We left the bar like two people who had no intention of looking back, stepping into the cool night air with the kind of urgency that makes everything feel inevitable. His hand slid to the small of my back as we walked, and that simple touch sent heat straight down my spine. I told myself I was in control, that this was just a game I knew how to play. But the way his hand lingered told me that maybe I'd already lost. The cab ride to his place was a blur of neon lights and stolen glances, the tension thick between us. By the time we reached his door, we were already pulling at each other, kissing hard, bumping into walls, laughing like two people who knew exactly how dangerous this was and didn't care. His apartment was small but warm, cluttered just enough to feel real. Clothes hit the floor in a messy trail to the bedroom, and we fell into the sheets like we'd been waiting all night for this moment. The sex wasn't perfect, but it was raw, the kind that feels urgent, necessary, like a release more than anything else. We moved together like we were trying to outrun something, like we knew that whatever magic existed between us only had a shelf life of a few hours. But for that moment, it felt like enough. And then morning came. I woke up to pale sunlight creeping through the blinds, cutting across his room in thin lines that made everything look sharper. His arm was draped over me, his body warm against mine, his breathing slow and steady. For a second, I stayed still, listening to the quiet hum of the city outside, pretending that this was something more than what it was. But the weight in my chest told me the truth. It was just another night, and now it was over. I slipped out of bed slowly, careful not to wake him, and began gathering my clothes. The sweater that had made me feel bold the night before now felt heavy in my hands, like a costume I didn't want to wear anymore. I dressed quietly, slipping back into myself, into the version of me that knew exactly how this story would end. I was almost at the door when I heard him stir. "Leaving already?" he mumbled, his voice rough with sleep. I turned, forcing a smile that didn't quite reach my eyes. "Yeah, got a lot to do today." He propped himself up on one elbow, his hair a mess, his expression soft. "It was a good night," he said, and somehow that made it worse. "Yeah," I whispered. "It was..." And just like that, it was over. The walk to the curb felt longer than it should have, the cold morning air biting through my jacket. I wrapped it tighter around me, but it didn't help. The chill wasn't just outside, it was inside me too, settling deep in my bones, familiar and unwelcome. The Uber ride home was silent, the driver tapping along to some pop song I barely recognized. I stared out the window, watching the city blur past, and told myself I was fine. This was what I wanted, just a night, no strings, no expectations. But the truth sat heavy in my chest, impossible to ignore. It wasn't about him. It never is. It was about me, about the way I keep throwing myself into these fleeting moments, hoping they'll fill the spaces inside me that never seem to stay full. And the way they never do. I got home, kicked off my shoes, and collapsed onto my bed, not even bothering to change. The ceiling above me stared back, offering no answers, no clarity, just silence. I wish I could say that this was the last time, that I'd finally learned how to stop chasing something that slips away the second the sun comes up. But the truth? I'll probably do it again, because as much as I hate the mornings after, I hate the silence even more. Maybe someday I'll figure out how to stop, or maybe I won't. Maybe I'll keep going one night at a time, hoping that eventually one of these mornings will feel different. But until then, all I can do is keep moving forward. One kiss, one drink, one morning after the next. It started as something small, so small that, at the time, I didn't think it mattered. I went over to Nick's house because he asked me to drop off some stuff I borrowed, just a normal favor for a friend. Nick and I had been tight for years, and I'd spent so much time at his place growing up that I didn't even knock anymore. His mom, Lena, was used to me being around. She was the kind of mom everyone liked, laid back, funny, and always knew how to make you feel welcome. She was gorgeous, too, but I never let myself think about it. Lena had this easy, natural beauty. Dark hair she usually wore up, bright blue eyes that could pin you down in conversation, and a smile that made you feel like you were the only person in the room. I knew my friends joked about her sometimes, saying she looked more like Nick's older sister than his mom, but I never let myself really think about it. Until that day. Nick wasn't home when I showed up. It was just Lena, sitting on the couch in leggings and a loose sweater, reading something on her phone. She looked up when I came in and smiled. "Hey, stranger," she said. "You in a rush? Or do you want to stay for a bit?" I should have left. I should have made up an excuse, dropped off Nick's stuff, and walked right back out. But instead, I shrugged. "I got time. She patted the cushion next to her on the couch, and I sat down without thinking twice. It felt familiar, comfortable. We talked for a while, just about normal stuff at first. She asked me about school, work, if I was seeing anyone. I told her the truth, that everything felt kind of stuck, like I was just drifting through life without any real direction. "You're too hard on yourself," Lena said, giving me a soft, understanding smile. "You've got more going for you than you think." It was such a small thing, but it hit me in a way I wasn't prepared for. I hadn't realized how much I needed to hear something like that. And then things shifted. The conversation slowed, the air between us thickening with something I didn't want to name. Her hand rested lightly on my arm, just a casual touch, the kind you don't think twice about. But it stayed there longer than it should have, her thumb brushing softly over my skin. "You've grown up a lot," she said quietly, her eyes holding mine. My pulse kicked up, and suddenly, everything felt too close. Too dangerous. I knew I should get up, laugh it off, say something stupid to break the moment. But I didn't. Instead, I leaned in, and when I kissed her, she kissed me back. It was like a switch flipped. Her hands slid into my hair, pulling me closer, and before I knew it, we were tangled together on the couch, every touch more reckless than the last. My brain screamed at me to stop, to think about Nick, about how wrong this was. But the way she kissed me made everything else disappear. We didn't make it to the bedroom. It happened right there on the couch in the dim afternoon light. And when it was over, reality came crashing down like a wave, leaving us breathless and silent in the aftermath. "This can't happen again," she whispered, her fingers brushing lightly over my arm. "I know," I muttered, my heart still pounding. But I knew it was a lie. We both did. And it didn't stop there. Over the next few weeks, we kept finding ways to see each other. A quick visit when Nick wasn't home, stolen moments in the middle of the day, late-night texts that turned into secret meetings. It was dangerous and stupid, but it felt too good to stop. Every time I saw Nick, the guilt gnawed at me. He had no idea what was happening behind his back, no clue that I was betraying him in the worst way possible. Every time he called me his brother, it felt like I was falling deeper into a hole I'd never climb out of. But I kept going back to Lena, and then everything came crashing down. Nick came home early one day. We thought we had more time, just a few more hours, but suddenly the front door swung open, and there he was. For a second, he just stood there, staring at us like he couldn't believe what he was seeing. And then the confusion on his face twisted into rage. "What the fuck?" he whispered, his voice low and dangerous. I scrambled to my feet, panic setting in. "Nick, I can explain." "Explain," he snapped, stepping forward. "How the fuck do you explain this?" Lena tried to speak, but he cut her off with a furious shake of his head. His fists clenched at his sides, his whole body trembling with rage. "You were my best friend," he whispered, his voice breaking. "How could you do this? With her?" There was nothing I could say. No apology that would make any of this okay. "How long?" he demanded, his eyes blazing. "Neat? How long?" he shouted, his fists tightening like he was about to throw a punch. Since a few weeks ago, I admitted, my voice barely audible. The betrayal in his eyes hit harder than any fist ever could. "Get the fuck out of my house," he growled, his voice shaking. "Nick, please. Get out." I left without another word, the sound of the doors slamming behind me echoing in my head long after I was gone. Lena tried to reach out afterward, texts, late-night calls, but I ignored them. Whatever we'd had was over, and the cost of it was too high. Nick blocked me on everything, my phone, social media, all of it. I tried once to apologize, but it was useless. I knew I destroyed everything that mattered between us. It's been years now, and I still think about that day. The moment I could have walked away but didn't. The moment I let something fleeting ruin the one friendship that actually meant something. Some mistakes fade with time. Others stay with you, etched into your memory like scars you can never quite forget. And this one will haunt me forever. It was supposed to be nothing. A moment. A mistake. Something we could laugh about later, bury under all the years of friendship, and pretend never happened. That's what I told myself, anyway. But the thing about lines is that once you cross them, there's no going back. It was one of those nights that felt like it could go on forever. Me and Lex had been out at some bar with mutual friends, drinking just enough to blur the edges of the world, but not enough to forget how easy it was to be around each other. I'd known Lex for years. She was my person, the first call, the inside joke, the one who knew what I was thinking before I did. We'd danced around each other for so long that it felt natural, this strange limbo between more than friends and not quite lovers. People always assumed we were together, and we never corrected them. It was easier that way, easier than explaining something we didn't even understand ourselves. The night was winding down, and the others had started to peel off, leaving just the two of us. We sat at a corner table, nursing our last drinks and talking about nothing in particular. She was twirling the stem of her glass between her fingers, her eyes glassy with booze, and something else I couldn't quite read. "You ever think," she started, her voice trailing off like she wasn't sure she wanted to finish. "Think what?" She bit her lip, that familiar grin tugging at the corner of her mouth. "You ever think we've been playing this all wrong?" I felt my stomach flip, but I played it off. "What? You mean us?" She shrugged, but her eyes stayed locked on mine. "Maybe." I laughed, even though my chest was tightening. "We'd probably be a disaster." "Probably," she agreed, but the way she said it made my heart stutter. Like she was daring me, like she was waiting to see if I'd finally take the bait. And for once, I didn't stop myself. "Come over," I said, my voice rougher than I meant it to be. She stared at me for half a second, just long enough to make my heart feel like it was free falling. Then she grabbed her jacket and said, "Okay." The cab ride back to my place was quiet, but not uncomfortable. The kind of quiet that hums with all the things neither of us dared to say out loud. I could feel her sitting close, the warmth of her body just barely brushing against mine. And it was enough to make my head spin. When we got inside, everything felt inevitable. She kicked off her shoes, looked at me like she was daring me to back out. And when I didn't, she closed the space between us and kissed me. It was like finally letting out a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. Her hands in my hair, my fingers trailing down her back. It all felt so easy, so right, like we'd been rehearsing this moment for years without realizing it. We tumbled into my bed, shedding clothes and caution. And for the first time in a long time, nothing between us felt complicated. It was just her and me, tangled up in the quiet of the night, pretending like we could stay that way forever. Afterward, we lay there in the dark, her head resting on my chest, the world outside my apartment feeling far, far away. I wanted to ask her what this meant, if it was the start of something or just a detour we'd forget by morning. But instead, I kissed her hair and whispered, "You good?" She hummed, her fingers drawing lazy shapes on my skin. "Yeah, you. Yeah, elite." Because the truth was I knew right then and there, I was in love with her. Had been for years, probably. And now that I'd finally had her, I didn't know how to let her go. "This doesn't have to be a thing, right?" She whispered, her voice small. It felt like my heart was being squeezed in a vice, but I nodded. "Right? Just a one-time thing." But that was the lie we told ourselves. The first of many. It wasn't just a one-time thing. Not even close. We kept finding our way back to each other. On weekends, on lonely nights, on those slow Sundays when it felt like the rest of the world didn't exist. Every time we promised it would be the last, but it never was. And every time she left, it got harder to pretend I was okay with this version of her. This version of us. Because while she was content to keep things casual, I was already drowning in all the things I couldn't say. It finally unraveled one night after we'd spent the day together, wandering the city like we didn't have anywhere else to be. We ended up at my place, like we always did, her head resting on my shoulder as we watched a movie neither of us cared about. And I knew that I couldn't keep pretending. "I love you," I whispered, the words falling out before I could stop them. She went still beside me, her breath catching in her throat. And that was all it took to shatter whatever fragile thing we'd built between us. "Lex," I started, but she was already pulling away. "Why did you have to say that?" she whispered, her voice breaking around the edges. "Because it's the truth." She closed her eyes, like saying it out loud made it real, and shook her head. I can't be what you want." I felt the ground drop out from under me. "I'm not asking for anything." "Yes, you are," she said, her eyes glimmering with something close to regret. and I can't give it to you. She stayed the night, but it was different, cold, distant, like we were already halfway out the door. And in the morning, she kissed me on the cheek, whispered, "Take care," and walked out of my life. We tried to stay friends after that, but it was like trying to fit back into clothes that no longer fit. Every conversation felt like a reminder of what we'd lost, every touch like a spark that had burned out too soon. And slowly, painfully, we drifted apart. It's been months now, and I still think about her. I still see her in every song that plays on the radio, in every stupid inside joke that no one else understands. I wonder if she ever thinks about me, if she misses what we had, even just a little. People always say that sleeping with your best friend is either the best thing you'll ever do or the biggest mistake you'll ever make. For me, it was both. For a little while, I had her. I had everything. And then just like that, it was gone. Would I do it all over again? Honestly, I don't know. Part of me wishes I'd kept my mouth shut, that we'd stayed in that liminal space where things were safe and easy. But another part of me, maybe the bigger part, knows I wouldn't change a thing. Because even though it ended, even though it left me with more questions than answers, I'm still grateful. Because for a little while, she was mine. And even if I never have that again, at least I know what it feels like to love someone with everything I have. And maybe, just maybe, that's enough. Or maybe it isn't. But either way, it's all I have. I was lying in bed, scrolling on my phone, trying to unwind after a long day, when the power went out. The apartment went pitch black, and everything fell into that strange, eerie silence you only get when the world suddenly shuts off. No hum from the fridge, no buzz from the light fixtures. Just silence. At first, I thought it was just a blackout. It's happened before. My building's old. The wiring is garbage. I sighed, tossed my phone on the nightstand, and reached for the flashlight I keep in the drawer. Before I could grab it, I heard something. Top, top, top. It came from the living room. I sat still for a moment, my ears straining in the silence, hoping it was nothing. But then it came again. Tap, tap, tap. It wasn't loud, just soft, deliberate taps, like someone gently knocking from the inside of the apartment. My chest tightened, and my breath caught in my throat. I told myself it was probably nothing. Maybe something fell over. Or maybe Milo, my cat, was knocking something around. But then I remembered Milo was curled up at the end of the bed. I turned toward him, hoping to see him sleeping peacefully. But instead, he was wide awake, his ears flattened, his eyes locked on the bedroom door. His tail twitched nervously, and a low growl rumbled from deep in his throat. Something wasn't right. I grabbed my phone, hands shaking, and turned on the flashlight. The narrow beam cut through the darkness, illuminating the bedroom walls. I kept the light trained on the door, listening, hoping I wouldn't hear it again. Then the knock came back. But this time, it wasn't just a knock. Top, top, top. Then scratch. The sound of nails dragging across wood. Not hurried, not frantic, slow and deliberate, like someone enjoying the sensation of clawing down the surface. The hair on the back of my neck stood on end. I stared at the door, paralyzed with fear. The scratching stopped for a moment, and the silence felt worse. And then, the doorknob began to turn. It twisted, just slightly, just enough to let me know that whatever was out there was trying to get in. I clutched my phone tighter, my heart pounding so loudly it felt like it would tear out of my chest. The knob rattled again, and I thought, this is it. It's coming in. There's nowhere to run. Then I heard the voice. Let me in. It was my voice. I choked on a scream. I knew, deep in my bones, that whatever was on the other side of that door wasn't me. And it knew I was in there, cowering in the dark, just a few feet away. Please, it whispered, the words garbled and wrong. It's cold out here. The knob rattled harder. The door shivered in its frame. I backed up, pressing myself against the far wall, clutching my phone like it could somehow protect me. My breathing was ragged, shallow, and I knew if I made a sound, if I so much as whispered, it would know. And then the door began to open. Just a crack. Enough to see something slither through, a pale, thin hand, the fingers too long, too bony, each nail sharp and blackened. It rested lightly on the edge of the doorframe, tapping once, twice, as if to say, I'm here now. Milo hissed and bolted under the bed. I wanted to scream, but the sound caught in my throat. All I could do was watch, helpless, as the door creaked open wider, inch by inch, revealing more of that hand. Then it stopped. The fingers curled slightly, drumming on the wood, and the voice came again, still my voice, but quieter this time, almost teasing. "You've already let me in." I don't know how I moved. I think pure terror took over. I grabbed the door and slammed it shut with all the force I had, shoving my dresser in front of it. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely get the lock to click. The scratching stopped. For a moment, there was only silence. Then, top, top, top. This time, the sound came from the closet. I spun around, my breath hitching in my chest. The closet door was shut, just as I had left it. But someone was on the other side, waiting. I could hear it breathing. Shallow, rapid breaths, like it was excited. Like it knew I had nowhere else to go. The knob turned. Slowly, I backed away, clutching my phone, tears burning in my eyes. My entire body was trembling, and every instinct screamed at me to run. But there was nowhere to run to. The closet door creaked open, just an inch. And from the darkness, a voice whispered, "Come closer." I ran. I don't even remember how I made it to the front door. All I know is that 1 second I was in my bedroom, and the next I was bolting down the hallway barefoot and gasping for breath. I didn't stop until I was out of the building, standing under the flickering street lights, shivering in the cold night air. When I finally looked back up at my apartment window, I saw it, a figure standing there just behind the glass. It looked like me, and it was smiling. I haven't been back since. I stayed with a friend last night, but I know it's only a matter of time. I can still feel it, like it's watching, waiting for me to slip up. And tonight, just before I sat down to write this, I got a text. It was from my own number. The message said, "Let me in." And now, as I sit here in the dark, I can hear it again. Top, top, top. It's outside the door. And this time, I don't think the lock will hold. It all started with me deciding to make a smoothie. That's it. That's how this entire disaster began. I thought, you know what? I'm going to be healthy today. The bananas were perfectly ripe. I had a bag of frozen berries, some yogurt in the fridge. It felt like the universe was aligning to reward me with the perfect Instagram-worthy smoothie. What I forgot was that nothing in my life ever goes that smoothly. I pulled out the blender from the back of the cabinet, the one I never use but keep around just in case I suddenly decide to become a smoothie person. It had that weird, greasy film that small kitchen appliances get when they haven't seen daylight in a while. But I gave it a quick wipe and told myself this is going to be great. I started loading it up. Yogurt, a banana, a handful of frozen berries that hit the blender pitcher like little marbles. So far, so good. Then, for reasons I still can't explain, I decided to get fancy. I grabbed some peanut butter because apparently I thought I was a smoothie artist and dropped a heaping spoonful into the mix. It landed with a plop that felt ominous, but I ignored the warning signs. Next came the liquid. I opened the fridge to grab the almond milk. And of course, there was only about a half-inch left in the carton. Cool, I muttered. Just perfect. But I wasn't about to abandon my smoothie dream, so I filled the rest of the blender with water. Because hey, hydration is important, right? With everything loaded up, I snapped the lid on top and hit the power button. Nothing happened. I pressed it again, harder this time, as if the blender just needed encouragement. Still nothing. I checked the outlet. The plug was in. I pressed every button, low, high, pulse, smoothie mode, but the blender sat there in stubborn silence, as if it had entered retirement without informing me. At this point, I was too deep into this to back out. I had committed. I unplugged the blender, plugged it back in because that's what you're supposed to do with broken technology, right? And gave the power button one last hopeful push. And then it roared to life. Except, one minor issue, I'd forgotten that I had switched the setting to max. The blender immediately shot into overdrive, vibrating violently across the counter like it was trying to escape. And before I could react, the lid popped off with a spectacular thwack and smoothie exploded everywhere. We're talking everywhere. The banana peanut butterberry water concoction shot straight into the air like some cursed fountain, splattering the walls, the floor, the cabinets, me. My shirt was now an abstract masterpiece, and I had smoothie dripping off my eyebrows. For a moment, I just stood there, frozen in shock, as if my brain needed a second to catch up to the mess I had just unleashed upon the world. The blender, meanwhile, continued its reign of terror, whirring angrily with no lid in sight. In a panic, I lunged toward it, trying to hit the off button, but my fingers were slippery with smoothie, and I couldn't get a grip. The blender thrashed on the counter like a possessed robot, spewing more chaos as it spun slightly to the side. "Stop!" I yelled, as if the blender could hear me. It did not. In a moment of desperation, I grabbed the entire blender still running and yanked the power cord out of the wall. It sputtered, gave one last dramatic whirl, and finally died. The kitchen fell into stunned silence, the only sound being the slow drip of smoothie sliding off the cabinets. I stood there, panting, looking around at the scene of destruction. The counter was a crime scene. The walls were streaked with berry sludge. Even the cat, who had been napping on a chair in the corner, now had a single pink splatter on her paw. She gave me the kind of disgusted look usually reserved for bad weather or empty food bowls, then promptly licked the smoothie off her paw and walked away, as if she wanted no part in whatever nonsense I had just created. I surveyed the damage, trying to figure out where to even begin. My brain whispered, just burn the kitchen down, start over. It's the only way. But since arson wasn't a reasonable option, I grabbed a roll of paper towels and began the long, sticky cleanup. 30 minutes later, the kitchen looked, well, not clean, but passable. I wiped down the cabinets, mopped the floor, and peeled bits of banana off the backsplash. The blender sat in the sink, abandoned like a traitor, while I rinsed the last of the smoothie out of my hair. Defeated but stubborn, I decided to salvage what little smoothie was left. I scraped the remaining sludge out of the blender pitcher and poured it into a glass. It looked less like a smoothie and more like soup. Votari, sad fruit soup. I gave it a little stir and took a sip. It was horrible. Somehow, it was both too sweet and too bland at the same time. The peanut butter overpowered everything, and the berries had turned into weird little seeds that got stuck in my teeth. I choked down a few sips, purely out of spite, and then poured the rest down the drain. The cat reappeared, curling up on the floor as if to say, well, that was pathetic. You think, I muttered, flicking water at her. She flicked her tail in response, unbothered as always. I stood there for a minute, leaning against the counter, wondering where I went wrong. Maybe it was the water. Maybe it was the peanut butter. Maybe it was the fact that I thought making a smoothie would somehow be simple. And that's the thing, isn't it? Life is never as easy as you expect. You think you're just going to make a smoothie, and suddenly you're mopping yogurt off the ceiling and questioning your life choices. But in the end, you laugh. Because what else can you do? Some days are just smoothie explosion days. You clean up the mess, let it go, and hope tomorrow's chaos is slightly less sticky. I grabbed a clean glass, filled it with water. Just water, no peanut butter this time, and flopped onto the couch, feeling weirdly satisfied. Sure, the smoothie was a disaster. But the kitchen was still standing, the cat was still smug, and I was still alive. And honestly, that felt like a win. We met at a friend's picnic. One of those everyone brings something afternoons that feels a little chaotic and a little perfect all at once. I showed up with a bottle of wine and low expectations, ready to eat, make polite conversation, and leave before the sun went down. And then he sat next to me, all easy charm and crooked smiles, offering me half of his sandwich. I made two, he said. Figured someone would forget to eat before they showed up. I took it laughing. How'd you know it would be me? Lucky guess, he said with a grin. And just like that, we were off. We talked for hours that day, sitting on a blanket while people came and went around us. He was curious in a way that felt real. Not like he was going through the motions, but like he genuinely wanted to know who I was. I told him about my dream to travel across Europe by train someday, and he told me about the old camera he always carried but rarely used. It felt light, effortless, like meeting someone I hadn't known I'd been waiting for. Before we left, he asked for my number. We've got unfinished conversations, he said, his eyes warm with that kind of promise that makes you believe maybe, just maybe, this could be something. And for a while he made me feel like life was lighter, like things didn't always have to be complicated to be good. We spent weekends exploring new neighborhoods, trying new foods, and making each other laugh over the stupidest things. There was no guessing with him. He showed up when he said he would, texted just to say hi, and made me playlists filled with songs I didn't know I needed. For the first time in what felt like forever, I let my guard down. I let myself believe in the possibility of something good. But then, slowly, things began to change. It wasn't sudden, more like a slow drift, so subtle I almost missed it. The texts became shorter. The plans took longer to confirm. He started canceling more often, always with a polite excuse that left me no room to argue. Work's been crazy, he'd say. Or, let's catch up soon. Soon became a word I hated. I told myself not to panic, that this was normal. Relationships shift, life gets busy. But deep down, I knew the pattern too well. The slow fade, the soft unraveling. I'd seen it before, lived it before, and no matter how hard I tried to hold on, he was already slipping away. One night, after a week of half-hearted texts and canceled plans, I finally broke. I sent him a message. Hey, can we talk? I just need to know if we're still on the same page. The dots appeared, then disappeared. I sat there, heart pounding, waiting for the answer I already knew was coming. When his message finally came through, it was as gentle as it was devastating. I care about you so much, he wrote, but I think I'm not in the right place for this right now. You deserve someone who can show up for you the way you need. It was the kind of breakup that tries to sound kind, but kindness doesn't make the hurt any softer. I stared at his message, the weight of it settling in my chest. I wanted to scream, to ask him why he made me believe in something if he wasn't ready to follow through. But I knew there was no point. People leave for reasons that have nothing to do with you, and knowing that doesn't make it easier to bear. So I wrote back, okay, I hope you figure things out. And just like that, it was over. The next few days passed in a haze. I told myself I'd be fine, that I'd been through worse, that I could survive this. But the thing about heartbreak is that no matter how many times you go through it, it always feels brand new. The ache sits heavy in your chest, and the memories sneak up on you when you least expect them. A song, a photo, the quiet sound of your phone not buzzing with their name. I deleted his number, muted his social media, and told myself I'd move on. But some nights, I'd still find myself scrolling through our old conversations, rereading the moments when everything felt simple and good. I wanted to go back to figure out where it all went wrong, but there was no single moment to pinpoint, just a gradual drift into silence. That's the hardest part, I think. It's not the goodbye that breaks you. It's the almost. The idea that something good was right there, within your grasp, and then it slipped away before you even realized what was happening. But slowly, painfully slowly, I started to let go. Not all at once, but little by little. I stopped checking my phone, stopped waiting for him to come back. The ache was still there, but it began to feel smaller, quieter, manageable. Some days are better than others. There are moments when I feel okay, when I think maybe I've made peace with it all. And then, out of nowhere, the sadness will hit me again, soft and sharp, like a bruise I thought had healed. But I've learned that's just how grief works. It sneaks up on you, even when you think you've moved on. But here's what I know now. I can survive it. I've survived it before, and I'll survive it again. Because as much as it hurts to lose someone, it hurts even more to lose yourself trying to hold on to them. And I won't do that anymore. These days, I'm learning how to love myself in the way I kept hoping someone else would. I'm building a life that feels good, not because I'm waiting for someone to share it with, but because I deserve that kind of joy. I still believe in love, not the perfect storybook kind, but the real, messy, complicated kind, the kind that chooses you even when things aren't easy. And if love finds me again, I'll be ready. But this time, I won't shrink myself to fit into someone else's life. I'll stand exactly as I am, whole, imperfect, and enough. Because if there's one thing I've learned, it's this: I am enough. With or without someone else, I am enough. And that's a kind of peace no one can take from me. So I'll keep going, one step at a time, one breath at a time. And if someone shows up who's willing to walk beside me, that'll be a gift. But if not, I'll still be here, standing tall, knowing that I have myself. And for now, that's more than enough. The first time I tried flirting at a museum, accidentally became part of an exhibit. Yeah, It was just as weird as it sounds. It started because my friend Nate had a date, and for reasons beyond my understanding, he asked me to tag along to a contemporary art museum. "Come on," he said. "It's a group thing. Her friend is coming too. Maybe you'll hit it off." I wasn't thrilled about the idea of being the awkward third wheel at a modern art gallery, which for the record, I know nothing about. But against my better judgment, I went. Worst case, I figured I'd look at some weird art, make a couple of bad jokes, and bail early. What I didn't expect was her. We met in front of a giant steel sculpture that looked like a toaster exploded. She introduced herself as Sophie, and right away, I was hooked. She had this infectious energy, messy hair, bright smile, and the kind of laugh that makes you forget you're standing next to a metal cube titled The Absurdity of Time. "So," she said, tilting her head toward the sculpture, "what do you think? Genius or total nonsense?" I grinned. "Oh, definitely genius," I said. "It's clearly about how life is like toast. It gets burned no matter how hard you try." She laughed, and I swear I could have stood there talking to her all day. But before I could say anything else, the group moved along to another exhibit, a series of random objects scattered across the floor, labeled a study in chaos. Nate and his date wandered off, leaving Sophie and me standing in front of what looked like a pile of discarded furniture. There was a chair missing half a leg, a lamp with no light bulb, and a deflated beach ball. "Art is wild," I muttered, trying to make sense of it. Sophie grinned. "Honestly, this just looks like my apartment." I laughed, feeling like things were actually going well for once. "Do you think they just raid thrift stores and call it art?" I asked, glancing around. "Probably," she said, nudging me playfully. "It's brilliant. I'm half tempted to add something to it." "Yeah," I said, raising an eyebrow. "What would you add?" She pretended to think for a second. "Maybe a broken umbrella," she said, grinning. "Or an old shoe. Something that really says chaos." I laughed, and in that moment, I thought, hey, maybe this is it. Maybe I can actually pull this off. And then, of course, things went wrong. We were standing by the display, chatting and laughing, when I leaned a little too far back, and my hand brushed against the leg of the broken chair. "Careful," Sophie whispered, her eyes wide with amusement. "Don't touch the art. That's like rule number 1. Right, I said, taking a step back. "No touching." "Got it." But just as I was trying to regain my balance, I stepped backward, directly onto the edge of the deflated beach ball. My foot slipped, and before I knew it, I was falling, arms flailing, heart racing, and landed smack in the middle of the exhibit. For a moment, everything was silent. I was sprawled out on the floor, tangled with the broken chair, the lamp, and several other mysterious objects. Sophie was trying, and failing, to stifle her laughter. "Oh my God," she whispered, covering her mouth. "Are you okay?" "Yep," I muttered, still lying there, just blending in with the art. She burst out laughing, and soon the other visitors started noticing the new addition to the exhibit. People were staring, whispering, and worst of all, nodding thoughtfully, like I was part of some brilliant interactive performance piece. One guy even leaned over to his friend and whispered, "This must represent man's struggle with modernity." "Exactly," I muttered under my breath, wishing the ground would swallow me whole. Sophie was practically doubled over at this point, tears in her eyes from laughing so hard. "You're a natural," she said between giggles. "Honestly, I think you just improved the exhibit." "Glad to help," I muttered, sitting up and trying to untangle myself from the mess of furniture. Before I could fully stand, a security guard appeared, looking half amused, half annoyed. "Sir," he said sternly, "please step out of the exhibit." "Right," I said, brushing off my jeans and attempting to look like a functional adult. "Sorry about that. Just immersing myself in the experience." The guard shook his head but didn't seem too angry. "This is modern art," he muttered. "Happens more often than you'd think." I finally got to my feet, wincing as I adjusted my jacket. Sophie was still laughing, her grin wide and delighted. "You are unbelievable," she said, shaking her head. "I can't believe you just did that." "Hey," I said, trying to salvage what little dignity I had left. "Go big or go home, right?" She smiled, and for a second, I forgot all about the exhibit, the security guard, and the fact that half the museum was now convinced I was some kind of performance artist. "You know," she said, tilting her head playfully. I think you owe me a coffee for that performance. I grinned, feeling like maybe, just maybe, I hadn't totally blown it. Deal, I said, as long as there are no chairs involved. Or beach balls, she added, her eyes sparkling. We exchanged numbers right there, in the middle of the museum, with the remnants of the exhibit still scattered around us. As we walked toward the exit, still laughing about the whole thing, I couldn't help but feel like the universe had thrown me a bone for once. Sure, I'd fallen into an art display, but somehow, I'd also landed a coffee date. And honestly, that felt like a masterpiece. This one is known as the time we stole the school's hamster. Now, first off, I need to make one thing clear. The hamster was not part of a prank. At least, not at first. The whole thing started as a rescue mission, an act of pure, unfiltered stupidity disguised as heroism. But like every plan we ever had, it quickly spun out of control. So, here's the setup. Our biology class had a class pet, a chubby little hamster named Mr. Nibbles. Mr. Nibbles lived in a plastic cage on a shelf next to the beakers, running on his wheel and chewing on sunflower seeds, oblivious to the chaos that surrounded him daily. Everyone loved Mr. Nibbles. Well, everyone except Mr. Hanover, the biology teacher. Mr. Hanover hated animals. We never understood why the school gave him a hamster in the first place. But rumor had it he once tried to release Mr. Nibbles into the parking lot to teach him about the food chain. We figured he was joking, but Mr. Hanover was not a joke-telling kind of guy. So, when we overheard him muttering about getting rid of the hamster for good, we knew we had to act fast. It's not just a hamster, Ethan whispered, gathering us around at lunch like we were planning a secret mission. It's our hamster. Technically, Lexi said, he belongs to the school. Not anymore, Ethan replied, dead serious. We're busting him out. This was objectively a terrible idea, but once Ethan decided something, it was happening whether we liked it or not. So that's how me, Ethan, Lexi, and Ben found ourselves sneaking into the science wing after school with a shoebox, some lettuce, and zero common sense. Breaking into the biology lab was surprisingly easy. Mr. Hanover never locked anything because, in his words, only idiots steal from schools. He was not wrong, but we were determined idiots. The plan was simple. Grab Mr. Nibbles, sneak him out in the shoebox, and smuggle him to Ben's house, where he could live a life of freedom, i.e., live in Ben's basement and eat Cheetos. Foolproof, right? Well, we managed to grab Mr. Nibbles without much trouble. He seemed thrilled to be leaving, probably because Hanover never let anyone play with him. And we were halfway to freedom when Ben said the 5 words that sealed our fate. What if we give him a tour? Ethan's eyes lit up. Yes, this hamster deserves to see the world. By the world, Ethan meant the entire school. We weren't just going to rescue Mr. Nibbles. We were going to let him live his best life before disappearing into the night. The plan now was to parade Mr. Nibbles through every hallway, every classroom, and maybe even onto the football field if we had time. Hamster Freedom Tour 2024. Ethan announced as he gently placed Mr. Nibbles in the front pocket of his hoodie. This was mistake number 1. We started in the library. Lexi took a selfie with Mr. Nibbles in front of the quiet reading zone sign while Ben tried to teach the hamster how to use a Chromebook. We were giggling so hard that we almost forgot we were supposed to be sneaking around. Mr. Nibbles just sat there, munching on a piece of lettuce, completely unaware that he was at the center of the dumbest heist in school history. Things started going downhill when Ethan decided to take Mr. Nibbles to the teacher's lounge. Think about it, Ethan whispered. How many hamsters can say they've been inside the teacher's lounge? 0, Lexi replied, because it's a terrible idea. But Ethan, being Ethan, ignored her and marched right into the lounge. The rest of us followed, half curious, half terrified. And there it was, the Holy Grail. The fabled vending machine where teachers hoarded the good snacks. Ethan held up Mr. Nibbles like Simba in The Lion King and whispered, "Behold, little buddy, the snack kingdom." And that's when Mr. Nibbles made his move. Before any of us could stop him, the little dude jumped out of Ethan's hoodie pocket. He hit the floor, scampered across the room, and somehow managed to squeeze himself into the vending machine through the little flap where snacks come out. "Oh, my God," Lexi hissed. The hamster is inside the vending machine. Ben dropped to his knees, peering into the slot. Mr. Nibbles, come back, buddy. Meanwhile, Mr. Nibbles was having the time of his life. He was inside the vending machine, climbing over bags of chips like Indiana Jones in a treasure vault. This is not good, I whispered. Ethan was already trying to figure out how to dismantle the machine. Okay, all we have to do is... Before he could finish, the door to the lounge swung open. It was Mr. Hanover. There was a brief moment of stunned silence. Hanover stared at us. We stared at him. Mr. Nibbles, now inside the Dorito section, pressed his tiny face against the glass like he was taunting the man who had once tried to banish him. What? Hanover growled. Are you idiots doing? Ethan, because he has no survival instincts, said, field trip. That's when Mr. Nibbles, in a final act of rebellion, triggered the vending machine. A bag of Skittles dropped with a loud thunk, spooking him, and he shot out of the machine like a rocket, skittering across the floor. Catch him, Hanover bellowed, diving after the hamster. It was absolute chaos. We were all screaming. Hanover was on his hands and knees chasing Mr. Nibbles, and Ethan was shouting, "Run for it," like we were in the middle of a bank robbery. Somehow, against all odds, Mr. Nibbles made it to the door. He bolted into the hallway, and we followed, sprinting as fast as we could. Behind us, we could hear Hanover swearing like a sailor. We tore through the school, dodging teachers, jumping over backpacks, and laughing so hard we could barely breathe. Mr. Nibbles was unstoppable. He led us all the way to the gym, where he finally stopped, sat down in the middle of the basketball court, and started nibbling on a Skittle like he hadn't just escaped certain doom. We stood there, gasping for breath, trying to process what had just happened. We did it, Ethan whispered. We freed the hamster. And then the fire alarm went off. Apparently, Hanover had pulled it in a last-ditch effort to stop us. Within minutes, the entire school was being evacuated, fire trucks pulling into the parking lot, kids pouring out of classrooms, and teachers frantically trying to figure out what was going on. We knew we were done for. There was no way to explain this. We were about to get expelled over a rogue hamster and a bag of Skittles. But then, in one final act of insanity, Ethan picked up Mr. Nibbles, held him over his head, and shouted, "Long live the king." The entire student body erupted in cheers. Somehow, we weren't expelled. The teachers were too tired to deal with us. Hanover was banned from having class pets ever again, and Mr. Nibbles? He retired to Ben's basement, where he lived out the rest of his days like a tiny legend. And every year at the school reunion, someone always asks, "Remember the time we stole the hamster?" And Ethan? Ethan just grins and says, "Yeah, he won." It wasn't supposed to go this far. That's what I kept telling myself, even as it did. The thing about being best friends with someone like Kara is that you get comfortable. You think you can stay in that sweet spot between closeness and longing forever. But you can't. Eventually, something cracks. It started the same way most things with us did. Harmless, easy, like slipping into an old habit. Kara texted me late, "You awake?" And, of course, I was always awake when it came to her. "Come over," she wrote next, and I knew the second I read those words that I should say no. But instead, I was pulling on my hoodie and heading out the door. When I got there, she was curled up on the couch, legs tucked under her, scrolling through some shows she'd pretend to watch but never actually pay attention to. She looked up, her smile soft and familiar. "Thought you'd flake," she said. "You know better," I told her, sitting down beside her, close enough that our legs touched. And just like that, we were back in our rhythm, the same rhythm we'd been dancing to for years. Comfortable, easy, dangerous in ways neither of us ever acknowledged. We opened a bottle of wine and talked about everything and nothing, the way we always did. She complained about her job. I made jokes about my disastrous dating life. And somewhere between the second glass and the second hour, she rested her head on my shoulder. "You ever wonder if we're just wasting time?" she asked suddenly, her voice quiet, almost tentative. "Wasting time how?" She shrugged, but she didn't move away. Like, what if we're both just waiting for something that's right in front of us? I could have brushed it off, made a joke, changed the subject. That would have been the smart thing to do. But instead, I turned to look at her, and everything between us shifted. "Kara," I started, but before I could say anything else, she kissed me. It wasn't tentative. It wasn't careful. It was the kind of kiss that felt like years of holding back had finally broken free. And once it started, there was no stopping it. We fell into each other the way only best friends can, effortless and messy, like this was where we were always meant to end up. We stumbled into her bedroom, shedding clothes and years of unspoken tension. And for a little while, nothing else mattered. It was just us, tangled up in the dark, finally crossing the line we'd danced around for so long. Afterward, we lay there in the quiet, her head resting on my chest, and I thought this could be it. This could be everything. This doesn't change anything, right? She whispered into the darkness. I wanted to tell her it had already changed everything, that I didn't know how to be her friend without wanting more. But instead, I kissed her hair and whispered, right, nothing has to change. And just like that, I sealed my own fate. We kept it going after that, late night texts, stolen moments, nights spent in each other's beds. We told ourselves it was casual, that we were still just us. But every time she left in the morning, it felt like a goodbye. And every time she kissed me goodnight, I wanted to tell her how badly I wanted her to stay. But Kara wasn't the kind of person you could keep. She was always halfway out the door, always looking for something she hadn't found yet. And me? I was just the person she came back to when the world got too heavy. I told myself I could handle it, that having her halfway was better than not having her at all. But the truth is, I was already falling apart. It all came to a head one night when we were lying in bed, the glow from the streetlights spilling through the curtains. I could feel her breath against my skin, soft and steady, and before I could stop myself, the words slipped out. I love you. She went completely still beside me, and in that silence, I felt everything between us unravel. Kara, I whispered, but she sat up, pulling the blanket around herself like a shield. You can't say that, she whispered, her voice breaking. Why not? I asked, even though I already knew the answer. She shook her head, her eyes glimmering with something I couldn't quite place. Regret, sadness, fear, maybe all three. Because you know I can't love you back the way you want me to. Her words hit me like a punch I wasn't ready for, even though I should have seen it coming. I nodded, swallowing hard against the lump in my throat. Yeah, I know. She stayed the night, but it was different. And when morning came, she kissed me softly, too softly, and whispered, I'll see you soon. But we both knew she wouldn't. We tried to stay friends after that, but it was like trying to hold on to smoke. Every conversation felt forced, every laugh a little too brittle. And slowly, painfully, we drifted apart. Not with a fight, but with silence. The last time I saw her, we hugged goodbye like it was nothing. But it wasn't nothing. It was the end of something I'd never really had, but always wanted. It's been months now, and I still think about her. I still wonder if she ever misses me, if she ever regrets what happened between us, or if she's already moved on to something new, something easier. I still catch myself scrolling through old messages, rereading our conversations, trying to hold on to pieces of her that are already slipping away. People say that sleeping with your best friend is either the best decision you'll ever make or the worst mistake of your life. For me, it was both. For a little while, I had her, and even though it ended, even though it left me shattered in ways I didn't know were possible, I wouldn't take it back. Because some people aren't meant to stay in your life forever. Some people come into your life to teach you something about love, about yourself, about what it means to let go. And even though it hurts, God, does it hurt? I'm still grateful. Because for a little while, she was mine. And even if I never have that again, at least I know what it feels like to love someone with everything I have, even when it isn't enough. And maybe, just maybe, that's enough. Or maybe it isn't. But either way, it's all I have. It all started with a simple task. Take the trash out. Nothing heroic. Just one bag, out to the dumpster and back inside. But somehow, even the most basic chores have a way of spiraling into full-blown disasters when you least expect it. I grabbed the trash bag, tied it up, and swung it over my shoulder like I was hauling treasure. The cat watched from her perch on the windowsill, judging me with those cold, calculating eyes that cats have, like she knew something was about to go wrong and was already mentally distancing herself from the fallout. The first warning sign was the bag itself. It felt suspiciously heavy, Not normal trash heavy. This was the kind of heavy that makes you wonder if the bag has secretly been collecting items from around the house when you weren't looking. But I ignored it. It was just a trash bag. How bad could it be? I opened the door, and immediately, a gust of wind smacked me in the face like the universe saying, "Turn back now, fool." The hallway outside was colder than I expected, but I didn't want to go back inside to grab a jacket. This was supposed to be a 2-minute mission. Get out, dump the trash, get back inside. No distractions. I stepped outside and immediately regretted my life choices. The wind picked up again, stronger this time, whipping the trash bag against my leg and threatening to tear it open. I clutched it tighter, determined not to let it spill, and made my way down the steps toward the dumpster at the end of the parking lot. It was dark, the kind of dark where the streetlights don't seem to work properly, flickering like they've just escaped a horror movie. I told myself it was fine. I was not going to get spooked by a routine garbage run. Except, halfway to the dumpster, the trash bag started to leak. I heard it before I saw it. A slow, wet drip that hit the pavement with a disgusting splat. I froze mid-step, horrified, and glanced down to find a steady stream of some unidentifiable liquid leaking from the bottom of the bag. It smelled faintly like expired salsa mixed with regret. Of course, I whispered, because why wouldn't this happen? I tried adjusting the bag, hoping to stem the leak, but it was too late. Whatever was inside had already committed to making a break for it. The bag sagged dangerously in my hands, the weight shifting in unpredictable ways. I could feel something lumpy sloshing around, and every step I took sent more liquid oozing down the side of my jeans. By the time I reached the dumpster, I was done. I hoisted the bag up, ready to launch it over the edge and into the bin. Except the wind had other ideas. Just as I lifted the bag, a gust slammed into me, catching the edge of the plastic, and the bag ripped. In one horrifying instant, the bottom gave out completely, and the contents exploded onto the pavement with the kind of drama usually reserved for action movies. Rotten vegetables, old coffee grounds, soggy paper towels. Everything hit the ground with a splatter that echoed through the parking lot like a symphony of failure. I stood there, clutching the empty remnants of the bag, too stunned to even swear. The wind howled, scattering loose garbage across the lot like confetti at a very sad party. I watched helplessly as a stray banana peel tumbled into the distance, never to be seen again. Seriously? I muttered to no one. The dumpster loomed in front of me, looking more smug than a metal box had any right to be. I scrambled to pick up the worst of the mess, barehanded, because of course I'd forgotten to bring gloves, while muttering every curse word I knew. The cold wind stung my hands as I scooped up coffee-soaked paper towels and some unidentifiable glob that I really didn't want to think too hard about. By the time I tossed the last bit of trash into the dumpster, my jeans were streaked with mystery juice, my hands smelled like rotting cilantro, and my dignity was nowhere to be found. I kicked the empty plastic bag into the bin for good measure, just to assert some form of dominance, then turned to head back to the apartment. That's when I heard the door slam. I froze. No. I sprinted back toward the building, my heart sinking faster with every step. Sure enough, the door had swung shut behind me, locking itself with that special kind of cruelty that only self-locking doors can deliver. I stood there in the cold, panting, covered in trash water, staring at the locked door like maybe it would magically open out of pity. Spoiler, it didn't. My keys? Inside the apartment. My phone? Also inside. My cat? Probably sitting by the window, watching all of this unfold with great amusement. I let out a slow, frustrated breath, weighing my options. I could ring my neighbor's doorbell, but it was late, and I wasn't exactly in polite company condition. I could try calling the building manager if I had my phone, which I did not. Or I could just sit there and hope the wind carried me away. In the end, I opted for the only logical choice. I walked around to the back of the building and tried the window to my apartment. Mercifully, it was unlocked. Less mercifully, it was also just a little too high for me to climb through gracefully. But what else was I supposed to do? I hauled myself up, wiggled halfway through the window, and immediately got stuck. For one horrifying moment, I hung there, half inside, half outside, with one leg dangling uselessly behind me, wondering if this was how my life would end. Eventually, with a heroic amount of flailing, I managed to wriggle through the window and land in a heap on the floor of my living room. The cat greeted me with a bored blink, then yawned, clearly unimpressed by my adventure. I lay there for a minute, catching my breath, covered in dirt, smelling faintly of garbage, and thinking this was supposed to take 2 minutes. 2 minutes. I peeled off my soggy jeans, tossed them into the laundry basket, and made a mental note to never take the trash out again. Ever. The cat followed me into the kitchen, where I grabbed a glass of water and leaned against the counter, defeated but alive. And that's when I realized I'd left the recycling bag by the door. I stared at it, weighing my options, and then, without hesitation, I turned off the lights, walked to the couch, and flopped down with the cat curled beside me. The recycling could wait until tomorrow. Some battles just aren't worth fighting. It wasn't planned. These things never are. If someone had told me this would happen, if they'd warned me, I would have laughed in their face. But the truth is, the worst decisions always sneak up on you when you're not paying attention. 1 second, you're just doing something normal, and the next, you're standing in the middle of a mess you can't undo. It all started the week Noah went on vacation with his girlfriend. He asked if I could check on his mom, Jess, while he was away, just make sure everything was good at the house, water the plants, take out the trash. I said yes without a second thought. I mean, why wouldn't I? I'd known Jess for years. She was friendly, fun, and laid back, more like a cool aunt than a mom. She was gorgeous too, but it was one of those things I never let myself think about. Jess had this effortless kind of beauty. Long, wavy hair, bright brown eyes that always sparkled when she smiled, and a laugh that made everything seem lighter. My friends used to joke about how hot she was, but I always played it off. She was Noah's mom, and that made her off limits. Or at least, it was supposed to. The first time I stopped by, it felt normal. I helped her move a few heavy boxes and grabbed a beer from the fridge. We sat out on the porch afterward talking about random stuff, Noah's trip, work, life in general. It was easy. Too easy. You've been around for so long, Jess said, smiling at me over the rim of her beer. Feels like you're practically part of the family. I smiled back, trying not to think too much about how good she looked in her tank top and shorts. But that was the first crack, the moment something shifted, even though I didn't realize it yet. The next time I stopped by, things felt different. Jess opened the door with that same warm smile. But there was something else in the air, something unspoken. She poured us both a glass of wine, and we ended up sitting at the kitchen table, talking about deeper things than we probably should have. She told me about the divorce, about how lonely the house felt with Noah gone all the time. It's strange, she said, swirling her wine. You spend your life taking care of someone, and then one day, they don't need you anymore. There was a sadness in her voice that hit me in a way I didn't expect. I told her about how lost I'd been feeling lately, how I didn't know what I wanted out of life, how everything felt like it was moving too fast and too slow at the same time. You're too hard on yourself, Jess said softly, her hand brushing mine on the table. It was such a small touch, but it lingered, long enough to make my heart race, long enough to make me notice. I told myself it was nothing, just a friendly gesture. But when she looked at me, really looked at me, something inside me shifted. I should have left right then. I should have stood up, thanked her for the wine, and walked out the door. But I didn't. Instead, I kissed her. It wasn't slow or hesitant. It was like the moment had been building for longer than either of us realized. Her hands slid into my hair, pulling me closer, and suddenly, all the reasons why this was a terrible idea disappeared. We stumbled into the living room, breathless and reckless. Clothes were tugged aside, hands roaming, every touch more dangerous than the last. My mind screamed at me to stop, to think about Noah, to think about the fallout. But in that moment, I didn't care. When it was over, we lay there on the couch, the weight of what we'd done pressing down on us like a heavy blanket. This can't happen again, Jess whispered, her voice unsteady. Yeah, I agreed, though we both knew it wasn't true. And it didn't stop. We kept finding reasons to see each other, stolen moments, late-night texts, quick visits when no one was around. Every time we told ourselves it would be the last. Every time we gave in, the guilt was unbearable. Every time Noah called to check in, it felt like the walls were closing in on me. "Thanks for looking out for my mom," he'd say, completely unaware of the betrayal simmering just below the surface. It was like walking on a tightrope, waiting for the inevitable fall. And then the fall came. Noah came home a day early. We thought we had more time, but suddenly the front door opened, and there he was, standing in the doorway, his eyes wide with disbelief. For a second, everything froze, and then his expression shifted from confusion to rage. "You've got to be kidding me," he whispered, his voice low and shaking. "Noah, how long?" he snapped, cutting me off. His fists were clenched at his sides, his whole body trembling. "How long has this been going on?" There was no way to soften the blow. "A few weeks," I admitted, my voice barely audible. The look on his face was worse than any punch could have been. "You were supposed to be my best friend," he said, his voice cracking with hurt. "How could you do this? With her? I had nothing. No excuse, no apology that would make this right." "Get out," Noah growled, his voice sharp and raw. "Noah, please, get the fuck out." I left without another word, the door slamming behind me with a finality that echoed in my chest. Jess tried to reach out afterward, text calls, but I ignored them. Whatever we'd had was over, buried under the wreckage of what we'd destroyed. Noah blocked me on everything, phone, social media, all of it. I tried once to apologize, but it was pointless. The damage was done. It's been years now, but that night still haunts me. I see Noah's name pop up in mutual friends' posts sometimes, and every time it's like a punch to the gut. A reminder of everything I threw away for something fleeting and selfish. Some mistakes fade with time. Others stay with you, etched into your memory like scars that never fully heal. And this one? This one will haunt me forever. The first time I tried flirting at a bowling alley, I almost lost my shoe in the ball return. Yes, the shoe. It all started because my friend Chris roped me into his office's bowling for charity night. He swore it would be fun, beer, pizza, friendly competition. I wasn't exactly excited, but Chris promised me there'd be cute people there. "Come on, Jake," he said. "Bowling's the great equalizer. No one's good at it." Spoiler, that was a lie. We arrived, and the place was packed with people who took bowling way too seriously. There were custom bowling shoes, personal bowling balls, team shirts. I saw one guy stretching like he was about to run a marathon. Meanwhile, I could barely remember the last time I'd even bowled. And that's when I saw her. She was sitting a few lanes down, tying the laces on a pair of rented bowling shoes. She wore an old flannel over a band t-shirt, and her hair was tied up in a messy bun that somehow looked perfect. She laughed as one of her friends tried, and failed, to bowl a strike, and something about her energy made the whole place seem brighter. Chris nudged me. "There's your in," he said. "Go say something." I glanced down at my sad, rented shoes and said, "Chris, I'm literally wearing clown shoes." He grinned. "Exactly. Nothing to lose." So, against my better judgment, I grabbed my beer, straightened my back like I had an ounce of confidence, and walked over to her lane. "Hey," I said, leaning on the ball rack like I was the king of the bowling alley. "Mind if I offer some professional bowling tips?" She looked up, surprised but not annoyed. "Professional, huh?" she said, grinning. "You don't look like a pro." "That's because I left my championship belt at home," I said, giving her my best grin. Didn't want to intimidate anyone. She laughed, a warm, easy laugh, and I felt a little bit of the nervousness slip away. "All right, pro," she said. "What's your first tip?" "Well," I said, glancing at the score screen, "first you have to bowl the perfect amount of gutter balls to make your opponent feel confident, and then you crush their soul with a strike." "Oh, it's psychological warfare," she said, pretending to be impressed. "I like it." "Exactly," I said, feeling good about the banter. "Bowling is 90% mental. The other 10% is beer." She laughed again, and just as I was about to ask her name, one of her friends shouted, "Emma, it's your turn." So that was her name, Emma. She gave me a quick grin. "Stick around, pro. I could use the tips." "Wouldn't miss it," I said, stepping back to watch. She grabbed her ball, a bright purple one, and walked up to the lane with way more confidence than I had. I tried to look cool, standing by the ball rack with my beer in hand, but right as she bowled, disaster struck. I shifted my weight, and my left foot slid straight into the ball return. The sole of my shoe got caught, and before I could react, the ball return sucked my shoe half inside with a horrible clunk noise. "A what?" I muttered, trying to yank my foot free. Emma turned around just in time to see me wrestling with the ball return, hopping on one foot like a cartoon character. "Oh my God," she said, bursting out laughing. "How did you even do that?" "No idea," I grunted, still yanking at my shoe. Apparently, I've unlocked a new bowling hazard. By this point, a few other people had noticed what was happening. One guy actually cheered like I just performed a magic trick. Emma was doubled over, laughing so hard she had to hold onto the scoring table for support. "Don't worry," I muttered. "I've trained for this." "Right," she said, wiping tears from her eyes. "Is this part of your psychological warfare strategy?" "Absolutely," I said, still hopping awkwardly. "Confuse the opponent. Distract them with sheer stupidity." Finally, with one heroic tug, I managed to free my foot and stumbled backward, knocking over someone's half-empty soda in the process. I stared at the mess on the floor and then at Emma, who was still laughing like I was the funniest thing she'd ever seen. "So," I said, trying to salvage the moment, "how's that for a pro move?" "Honestly," she said, grinning, "I'm impressed." We stood there for a moment, both of us still catching our breath from laughing. And even though I just humiliated myself in front of half the bowling alley, I felt weirdly good, like maybe this disaster wasn't a complete loss. "So," I said, shifting awkwardly in my now very suspicious bowling shoes, "how about I buy you a drink, as a thank you for not posting that on the internet?" She tilted her head, smiling. "Tempting, but only if you promise to teach me more of your pro bowling moves." "Deal," I said, grinning. "First lesson, avoid the ball return at all costs." She laughed, and just like that, we headed toward the bar together, leaving behind the chaos of spilled drinks and confused bowlers. Sure, I almost lost my shoe to a bowling alley death trap, but somehow, I also managed to walk away with Emma's number. And honestly, that felt like a strike. It always begins with "I'll just see how I feel." I didn't want to go out. I told myself I was too tired, that I had nothing to wear, that I'd be better off staying in. But then the evening stretched too long, and the walls of my apartment started to feel too close. That itch, familiar, unwelcome, settled in my chest. I opened my phone and saw the inevitable message waiting. "We're out. Come through. Don't be boring." I sighed, told myself I wouldn't stay long, and threw on something that felt good enough: tight jeans, a crop top, a jacket slung over my shoulder like armor. One drink, I thought, then home. But I've lied to myself enough to know how the night would really end. The bar was loud, bodies pressed together in every corner, the air thick with cheap perfume, sweat, and the promise of bad decisions. People were packed along the bar, some laughing too loudly, others leaning into each other, their conversations swallowed by the music thumping through the walls. I wove through the crowd, looking for my friends, but instead I saw him. He stood near the end of the bar, hands tucked into the pockets of his jacket, watching the room with the kind of detached ease that makes you want to know what's going on in his head. He wasn't the loudest or the flashiest person there, but something about him drew me in. Maybe it was the way he seemed unbothered, like he didn't care whether anyone noticed him or not. I noticed him, and then, because I'm me, I made the first move. "Waiting for someone?" I asked, slipping into the space beside him at the bar. He glanced at me, just a flick of his dark eyes, and gave the faintest smile. "I didn't know I was," he said smoothly. I laughed, low and soft, leaning just close enough to brush against his arm. His energy was calm, steady in a way that felt dangerous, like stepping too close to the edge of something without knowing how deep it goes. And suddenly, the idea of leaving after one drink vanished from my mind. We started talking. He was easy to talk to in a way that felt disarming. No big lines or over-the-top flirting, just quiet confidence. Every word felt deliberate, like he knew exactly how to keep me right where he wanted. I didn't mind being there. The drinks kept coming, and the distance between us shrank with every sip. His hand brushed against mine once, twice, and by the third time, I stopped pretending it was accidental. The bar around us blurred, just lights and noise and people who didn't matter. It was only him, and the way he made me feel like I was the most interesting person in the room. And then, like it was inevitable, he leaned in and said, "Let's get out of here." I didn't even hesitate. "Let's go." The night air hit me like a slap, cold and sharp, but his hand found the small of my back, guiding me down the street toward a waiting cab. The tension between us hummed, electric, crackling in every glance and every brush of skin. The drive to his place felt endless and too fast all at once. Both of us silent, knowing exactly what was coming next. By the time we stumbled through his front door, we were already on each other, kissing hard, hands moving fast, pulling at clothes like they were obstacles between us and something we couldn't wait to have. His apartment was small, dimly lit, smelling faintly of cologne and whatever he'd cooked days ago. I barely noticed. The sex was good, messy and intense, full of moments that felt both urgent and inevitable. We laughed between kisses, swore under our breath, lost ourselves in the kind of closeness that only strangers can share. For those few hours, nothing else mattered. No worries, no questions, just skin and heat and the feeling of being alive. But mornings always tell the truth. I woke up tangled in his sheets, the room too bright and too cold. His arm was slung over me, heavy and warm, his breathing steady against my neck. For a moment, I let myself enjoy it. The rare stillness, the fleeting comfort of someone else's presence. But the familiar ache in my chest told me what I already knew. This wasn't a beginning. It was already over. I slid out from under his arm carefully, gathering my clothes from the floor. The jeans that had made me feel unstoppable last night now felt tight and suffocating. I pulled them on anyway, each piece of clothing a reminder that the magic of the night had dissolved with the sunrise. I was halfway to the door when I heard him stir. "You leaving?" he asked, his voice thick with sleep. I turned, forcing a small smile. "Yeah, early morning." He gave me a lopsided grin, his eyes still half closed. "It was fun." "Yeah," I whispered. "It was." And just like that, it was over. The walk to the curb felt longer than it should have, the cold air biting through my jacket. I wrapped it tighter around me, but it didn't help. The chill I felt wasn't just in the air. It was inside me too, heavy and familiar, settling in like an unwelcome guest. The Uber ride home was quiet, the driver tapping along to the radio while I stared out the window, watching the city roll by. I told myself it didn't matter, that this was all I wanted a night, nothing more. No streams, no complications, just a brief escape. But the truth sat heavy in my chest, impossible to shake. It wasn't about him. It never is. It was about me, about the way I keep throwing myself into these moments, hoping they'll fill the spaces inside me, only to find that they never do. I got home, kicked off my shoes, and collapsed onto my bed without even bothering to change. The ceiling above me stared back, blank and unmoving, offering no answers. Just silence. I wish I could say that was the last time, that I finally learned how to stop chasing something that slips away the second the morning comes. But the truth? I'll probably do it again, because as much as I hate the mornings after, I hate the silence even more. Maybe someday I'll figure out how to stop, or maybe I won't. Maybe I'll keep going, night after night, hoping that eventually one of these mornings will feel different. But until then, all I can do is keep moving forward. One kiss, one drink, one morning after the next. We met in the most ordinary way, waiting for our coffees at a crowded cafe on a rainy afternoon. I was scrolling through my phone, half listening for my name, when the barista called out the wrong order. He laughed before I did, looking up from his spot beside me. "That's definitely not my vanilla latte, but I'll take it if you don't." I smiled, shaking my head. "Pretty bold of you to steal someone else's mediocre drink." He grinned, easy and warm, and just like that, something clicked. It wasn't love at first sight or some magical, life-changing moment. It was simple, comfortable, like I'd stumbled into something good without even realizing it. We talked for a few minutes, just small talk, nothing special, but when he asked if I wanted to grab coffee on purpose sometime, I surprised myself by saying yes. I wasn't looking for anything, not really, but something about him made me think, maybe. And for a while, that maybe felt like it could turn into something real. The first few weeks were full of lightness. Early morning texts, spontaneous plans, inside jokes that made me feel like I was finally letting someone in. We didn't do anything extravagant. We just existed together in that easy, natural way that makes you forget you ever doubted love in the first place. Sunday mornings spent reading on his couch. Late night drives with music too loud. He was there, showing up, and it felt so good that I let myself believe he always would. It wasn't perfect, but it was ours. Until it wasn't. I can't tell you the exact moment it started to shift. Maybe it was the first time he canceled plans without rescheduling. Or the way his texts became shorter, more obligatory. Busy day turned into let's catch up later. And soon, later felt like a place we'd never actually get to. At first, I tried to ignore it. I told myself that people get busy, that relationships go through quiet phases. But the truth is, I could feel him slipping away, like a tide slowly retreating, inch by inch, before you even realize you're standing on dry sand. One night, after he bailed on plans again with a casual sorry, let's do something next week, I stared at my phone for a long time, wondering how we got here. I wanted to ask him what changed, but the words felt too heavy to send. Instead, I waited. I told myself if I gave him space, he'd come back. But space turned into silence, and silence turned into the awful realization that I was holding on to something that no longer existed. The next time we talked, I finally said what I'd been too afraid to say. Do you still want this? He hesitated, just long enough for my heart to break. I care about you a lot, he said, but I don't know if I can do this right now. There it was, the end, wrapped in softness, but no less final. I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. Okay, I whispered because there was nothing left to say. After we hung up, I sat on my couch, staring at the spot where his jacket used to hang. I tried to make sense of it, tried to figure out how something so good could slip away so quietly. But that's the thing about heartbreak. It never gives you answers. It just leaves you with questions you'll never get to ask. The days that followed were heavy, like moving through a fog that refused to lift. I deleted his number, muted his profile, and told myself it was time to let go. But the thing about letting go is that it's never as simple as deciding to move on. Grief doesn't work that way. It lingers, sneaking up on you in the quiet moments. When you hear a song he used to play, or pass the place where you had your first date, or catch yourself reaching for your phone before remembering he's not on the other end anymore. Some nights, I found myself scrolling through our old messages, reading the words we'd exchanged back when everything felt light and easy. I kept wondering what I could have done differently, what I missed where it all started to fall apart. But the truth is, some people leave not because you did something wrong, but because they weren't ready to stay. And knowing that doesn't make it hurt any less. But slowly, bit by bit, the ache began to feel quieter. Not gone, just smaller. Bearable. I stopped waiting for a message that wasn't coming. Stopped hoping for closure that would never arrive. The sadness still sneaks up on me sometimes, catching me off guard, but I've learned to let it pass through me without letting it undo me. Because here's what I've realized. Healing isn't about forgetting. It's about learning to carry the memories without letting them weigh you down. It's about understanding that not every connection is meant to last, and that's okay. Some people come into your life just to teach you how to let go. These days, I'm learning how to be okay with the silence he left behind. I still think about him sometimes. Not in a longing way, but in that quiet, familiar ache that reminds me of the good we had, even if it didn't last. And I think that's okay. Some love stories aren't meant to be forever. They're just meant to show you what's possible. I still believe in love. Not the perfect, fairy tale kind, but the real, messy, complicated kind. The kind that stays even when things get hard. And if love finds me again, I'll be ready. But this time, I won't shrink myself to fit into someone else's world. I won't chase after someone who doesn't know how to stay. Because if there's one thing I've learned, it's this. I am enough. Just as I am, with or without someone else, I am whole. And that's a kind of peace I never thought I'd find. So I'll keep going, one step at a time, one breath at a time. And if someone shows up who's willing to walk beside me, they'll be a gift. But if not, I'll still be standing here, knowing that I am enough just as I am. Because at the end of the day, I have me, and that I've learned is more than enough. The first time it happened, it felt like a mistake, one we could laugh about later. Just a moment between two friends, something we could bury under years of inside jokes and late-night conversations. That was the plan, but nothing about Sam ever stayed small. We've been best friends for so long that people stopped asking if we were together and just assumed we were. We never corrected them. It was easier that way, safer. We knew what we were, or at least we thought we did. Close enough to feel like something, but never quite crossing the line. Until we did. It was one of those long, late nights that we were too old for, but still found ourselves having. Sam had shown up at my place after work, exhausted but smiling, with 2 beers and a bag of Chinese takeout. Survival food, he called it, kicking off his shoes like he owned the place. We ate on the couch, watching bad TV, and the world outside felt far away like it always did when it was just us. We didn't talk about anything important, just the little things, the kind of conversations that feel like home, because they don't matter to anyone but the two of you. Somewhere between the last bite of takeout and the bottom of my beer, Sam leaned into me, his shoulder pressing against mine. I could have shifted away. I should have. But instead, I stayed. He turned his head, just slightly, and our eyes met. And suddenly, the air between us felt heavier, like we'd stepped onto a path we couldn't turn back from. "Do you ever think about it?" he asked softly. "About what?" "Us." I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. I could have made a joke, laughed it off, done anything to keep us from crossing that line. But instead, I whispered, "Yeah, I think about it." He didn't say anything. He just kissed me. It wasn't careful or planned. It was clumsy and desperate, the kind of kiss that felt like it had been waiting to happen for years. And once we started, there was no stopping. We fell into each other like we were drowning, like we'd been pretending for so long that this was the only way to breathe again. When we finally pulled away, breathless and tangled in each other, everything between us felt different. Not broken, not wrong, just different. And it scared the hell out of me. "This doesn't have to mean anything, right?" Sam whispered, his forehead resting against mine. I could feel the words I wanted to say, the truth, the fear, the hope, all clawing their way up my throat. But I swallowed them down and whispered back, "Right. It doesn't have to mean anything." We both knew that was a lie. After that, it became a pattern. We'd spend the night together, tangled up in sheets and silence. And in the morning, we'd pretend it didn't matter. We never talked about it. We just kept going, slipping between friendship and something more, hoping we could live in the in-between without falling apart. But I was already falling. I think I've been falling for years. Every time he left my bed, it hurt a little more. Every time he kissed me goodbye, I wanted to ask him to stay. But I never did, because I knew what he'd say. Sam wasn't looking for something permanent. He lived in moments, always chasing the next thing, never standing still long enough to belong to anyone. But I wanted him to belong to me. It all came crashing down one night, as these things always do. We were lying in bed, his arm draped over me, the sound of his breathing steady and calm. And before I could stop myself, the words tumbled out. "I love you." The silence that followed was unbearable. I could feel him go still beside me, his breath hitch in his throat. And in that moment, I knew I'd just ruined everything. I whispered, my heart pounding so hard it hurt. He sat up slowly, running a hand through his hair, his face twisted with something I couldn't quite place. Regret, maybe, or fear. I can't, you know that." The words hit me harder than I expected, even though I'd seen them coming. I nodded, swallowing back the lump in my throat. "Yeah, I know. I didn't mean for this to get complicated," he said softly, like an apology. "It's fine," I whispered, even though it wasn't. "I get it." He stayed the night, but it felt different, like we both knew this was the last time. And in the morning, when he kissed me goodbye, it tasted like a promise he couldn't keep. We tried to go back to being friends after that, but it didn't work. Every conversation felt like a reminder of what we'd lost. Every laugh like a wound that hadn't healed. And slowly, painfully, we drifted apart. The last time I saw him, we hugged goodbye like it was nothing, like we were still the same people we'd always been. But we weren't, and we both knew it. It's been months now, and I still think about him. I still wonder if he ever thinks about me, if he misses what we had, or if it was just another moment in a life full of fleeting things. I I still catch myself scrolling through old photos, rereading texts that feel like pieces of a life that isn't mine anymore. People say that sleeping with your best friend is either the best thing you'll ever do or the biggest mistake you'll ever make. For me, it was both. For a little while I had him. I had everything I ever wanted. And then, just like that, it was gone. Would I do it all over again? Honestly, I don't know. Part of me wishes I'd kept my mouth shut, that we'd stayed in that safe space where everything made sense. But another part of me knows that even if it ended the way it did, I wouldn't change a thing. Because some people aren't meant to stay in your life forever. Some people are just passing through, leaving behind memories that will ache in all the best ways, long after they're gone. And even though it hurts, God, does it hurt? I'm still grateful. Because for a little while, he was mine. And even if I never have that again, at least I know what it feels like to love someone with everything I have. And maybe, just maybe, that's enough. Or maybe it isn't. But either way, it's all I have.